Okay, how's Chris stopped? One more day, and I'll kind of laugh. Yeah, this is true, Yang. There we go. There we go. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me now? Is everything there? We go. So I reset reset all the settings. I reset the mixing board. I do apologize. I'm not going to replay the intro. I'm gonna have to cut this out somehow.
We did
Which
4 hours early for April Fools.
So again, to be able to make sure that we can upgrade our equipment to make sure this we stay on the cutting edge. As I'd mentioned before during the intro, if you love the show, and that was such a good intro too. You know what? We'll do this again at the end of the show. So, Scotty, if you'd like to be able to begin again, and I do apologize for the technical issues. Software is its own thing.
It's all right. It's all right. I understand fully. I think just what we were saying was the last time I was supposed to be here, I had to bail on you because just a few days after a clean bill of health, I was in the hospital having open heart surgery, and I've survived the open heart surgery by about 7 weeks now, and I've got a great scar that. Were I a younger man with fewer children and lesser wives, I would say it would be to impress the chicks, but that isn't going to happen now. So I came out with a nice scar and some good healing, and working better than ever according to my doctors. So there it is. That's where I was last time, and everything's going well now.
You know, and it's good to be able to see. It was we did miss you on the telethon. You know, and I know that you were looking forward to it, but again, your health is first and foremost, and when it comes to your wife and your kids, you know, making sure that you're there for them and making sure you can get as healthy as possible to keep being as awesome as you are every single day is, you know, it's an inspiration.
You sound like my wife, to be as awesome as I've always been.
Well, with that kind of facial hair, and again, I tried to emulate it as best I could, but I just don't have those Minnesotan genes, unfortunately.
Yes.
So, what have you got coming up in the next couple of months? Like, do you have a vacation planned? Any type of relaxation, recovery time, or do you have something cool and happening going on?
Well, you know, it's just getting life back to normal, getting back in the saddle, doing things that were left off. I still have tons of projects sitting here unfinished that were unfinished when all this started. Got a few events that I'll be speaking at. A few things going up. I was supposed to be in Egypt when this happened, and it's probably a good thing when you think about being 500, 600 miles south of Cairo and another 100 miles south of Luxor and out into the western desert a little bit, and having had something like this happen might not have turned out as well. So I plan to do that in the upcoming months, to get back to Egypt, where my good friend John Ward works out there at Gebel El Silsila. Mm-hmm. And and a couple of paranormal events coming up. Mid-South Paranormal, I'll be doing something with that. Working on a couple of different books with John Ward. And he's been a bit in absentia because they had, with their archaeological season, 3 seasons back to back to back. That they did this year, and kept us from working on some of our things together. So that's really it. That's all that's coming up as far as on my docket. It's getting things back to some modicum of normalcy, and several things I'm working on as far as writing projects.
And you know, if you've got these writing projects coming out, is there any chance that we can get you back on the show to be able to discuss those when they are released? Because I love your writing, I love what you do, and we want to make sure we can give you as much support as humanly possible going forward.
Let's get a nice book teaser together for you.
Well,
there you go. Absolutely, and I appreciate that. Right now, it feels like I've been gone so long, I'm trying to remember what it was like, and it's only been a couple of months. And I could imagine, I see Aaron sitting back there in the wings. Imagine having a couple of months where you don't do what you normally do every day, and then you get back into it and you say, what? Have I been gone for 10 years? And because things change so quickly and there's so much information to be catching up on.
And I'm of the same mind. Like if I stepped away from doing advertising at any point in time, or not doing graphic design, or not doing this show, it would just drive me absolutely insane. And I know my wife is telling me, like, it's like she's like, the summer's coming up. It's like, yeah, it's cottage country. Yeah, like you're going to take a hiatus at some point, right? I'm like, shit, can I?
Yeah.
And I don't know what, when I come back, will I forget how to be able to work the controls, or, it's it can be a little disorienting. But if you need the rest, you need the time off, and you need the ability to heal yourself, mind, body, and soul, take it, enjoy it.
Well, absolutely, and not to get too esoteric with it all, but to wax that way. But I think one of the things that was really impressed on me the last couple of months, which is something I've always believed, but more impressed now, are those irreplaceable moments of time. There's so much to do and so many things that we can just offhandedly dismiss. And in the busyness of trying to be on top of those things, we find that they run right by us. Wasn't it John Lennon, the famous sage John Lennon from the Beatles, said something like, life is that thing that passes you by while you're waiting for it to happen. So in the process of working and all of that, I think I was impressed during this period of the things that skip by very quickly. And no big foxhole type conversions or anything like that, other than realizations that there's a lot to do and a lot still to do, and I want to do it right, and I want to be around to do it. So,
well, and we appreciate you being that shining beacon for anybody who's going through anything or going through recovery and facing it head on with the strength and courage of 100 men. And I applaud you for that, and I thank you very much for that inspiration. Because there's a lot of people out there who may not have may not know which way to be able to turn.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that, and thank you. And I would say it's not the strength of 100 men, maybe 14, but working my way up to 100. So.
Well, it's appreciated. Now, I know that one thing is interesting, that you're going to be joining us on a new program that we've been starting up for the last 6 or so weeks. It's called The Hangover. It's a little more of our variety program, after breakfast or, after lunch or after dinner, depending on where you are in the world. And you've got a friend of yours that is going to be joining us. And, I've...
yes.
Can you go a little bit into how you guys linked up and who this man is?
Oh, well, that's going to be Rocky Stucci, of course. And now John Ward and I had been friends for many years. And we were doing Intrepid Radio as well as writing and all the things that we do together. And I encountered Rocky somewhere along the way. It's one of those obscure, when I'm thinking back, an obscure beginning. I don't remember exactly how we met, where we met, what was going on. But we got together and we got to talking and shared a lot of common interests. And we started doing radio with Rocky, doing political commentary, as opposed to all the other things that John and I were doing, which was alternative history, esoterics, all on top of academics, on top of paranormal, on top of mystical, all of those different things. And then we chose politics as a show that the three of us did together. And I would say that we had a lot of seriousness mixed with some good humor. And a little show we called the Sit Room or the Situation Room. And once John went back over to Egypt in October, and there's this moratorium by the United Arab Emirates to keep some of the communications online, are almost impossible. At least they were over the last year, and Skype especially. And so our communications were pretty rugged for a while, and so we couldn't broadcast together without doing some pre-record. And every time we tried to pre-record, that seemed to fall apart. The communications would fall apart on us. So John's going to be back here at the end of April, and we're going to do a few months of doing some programming together. But Rocky in that mix and I became pretty good friends a few years ago. And so he is probably tonight, as a matter of fact, from what I understand, and you can ask him about this, he's probably working up to the precursor to being able to speak well to the Hangover episodes. So The last I talked to Rocky, he said I'm on bottle of vino number 2. So it's a good thing he's probably not with us tonight. He may be more free-tongued at the moment than he normally is. So that's probably a little bit in store. Rocky's pretty hard-nosed. How would I put this? When we first started doing radio together, he had never done politics. He'd never done any of that stuff. He never knew never even knew what approach to take. And now, in a sense, we created a monster out of him because he's his own juggernaut when it comes to all of that right now. So he's going to be a lot of fun for you to talk with and have on.
And, I appreciate you joining us after breakfast. And, again, apologize to your wife for me for taking you away from the family affair on a Saturday and the Saturday morning cartoons. If we still have them, I'm not even sure if they're still out there. But it'll be a pleasure to have you back on and be able to talk politics as a Canadian observing the Americans right now. It will be amazing because we don't talk about politics here on the Den of Lore. On the Hangover, though, we talk politics. We talk whatever. So that's part of the fun. Scotty, I want to thank you very much again for taking the time to join us this afternoon or this evening. It's evening for you there. And, I'm looking very forward to having you on the show tomorrow morning.
It sounds good. You're going to have to remind me of the time again. I'm sure it's on my calendar, but what time do you need me in the morning?
We usually do it around 11 o'clock-ish Eastern, 10 p.m. your time. Like after breakfast, give me a call, tell me when you're ready, and then we'll kind of converge and stumble over to our computers and, get them going, and then we'll get it we'll get it going.
That sounds a lot better than 7 a.m. So 11 it is.
Well, it's appreciated. Again, thank you very much, Mr. Scotty Roberts. Ladies and gentlemen,
thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. And Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Now, I did know. Again, thank you very much for joining us again and joining with us on the opening program. And again, I do apologize for the technical issues. I'm not sure if it was my mixer or if it was the encoding software. Either way, if something is made by man, it must be infallible. That is the nature of the beast, as it were. Now, I'm going to introduce you to the ladies and gentlemen at home. You have quite the amazing and well-written bio. And for all ladies and gentlemen at home, Aaron Cheak, a PhD, is a scholar of comparative religion, philosophy, and esotericism. Excuse me. A former president of the International Jean Gebser Society from 2013 to 2015, he received his doctorate in religious studies from the University of Queensland in 2011 for his work on French Hermetic philosopher René Schwaller de Lubicz. Outside the academy, Aaron has been trained in the preparation of spagyric. Thank you very much, Alex. Elixirs. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce those two, but Alex, if you want to...
Paracelsus College and the Spagyricus Institute.
And is a practitioner within the Nyingma and Kagyu lineages of Buddhism, which is actually pretty cool. He presently lives in Karekare on the rugged west coast of New Zealand, you lucky son of a gun, because we're getting snow here today. Where he maintains an active interest in tea, wine, poetry, typography, something you and I actually share, and alchemy, something you and Alex actually share. Dr. Cheak is author and editor of Alchemical Traditions from Antiquity to the Avant-Garde, published in 2013, and founding director of Rubedo Press. And again, you can check out aaroncheak.com for more information, as well as we do have more websites in the list, in the show notes, to go check out all you need to from Dr. Cheak. So welcome to the program. Thank you for coming on the Den of Lore. It's a privilege and an honor to have you on the show with us today.
No, it's good to be here. I really love the premise of this show where you can drink scotch and talk esotericism.
Yeah, that was.
We came up with that all by ourselves.
Yeah, that was part of the fun. Now I know that you've got a good glass, a bottle of scotch. You went shopping for a single malt today, and you wanted to be able to join in the fun. And you were the first person that I think actually has joined us to drink scotch on the show, besides our guests, of course. Some people have drank whiskey. What do you have with you?
I do. I got yesterday afternoon. I picked up a bottle of Lagavulin.
Ooh, the 16-year.
Yeah, I mean, because I've just been wrapping up a book release, which pretty much just came together in the last week. And when you mentioned, drinking scotch on the show, but well, as a way of celebrating wrapping up this book release and going on the show, I thought I'd treat myself to a bottle of Lagavulin, which is probably one of the better whiskies I've had, to be honest. I'm not a massive whiskey connoisseur, but that's up there with the best in my experience.
Lagavulin, it's a very peaty scotch, and you can enjoy it very well. But every single time I always enjoy it after I've already had several other different types of scotches, and it's always at the tail end of the night. And it's usually that scotch that just tips me right over the edge, and it always gives me a massive hangover, so I have to stop drinking it.
Okay.
I generally recommend if you want to be able to get into scotches, Lagavulin is good. Anything from the Speysides, generally speaking, they're a little smoother. A lot of them are considered quote unquote starter scotches, but you can get the later years, and they're as smooth as butter with a little burning right here, that warmth you feel after a good glass, and it just loosens you right up. So for all those that are out there, that's why we've got a bottle of Glenfiddich. No, they're not a sponsor. We just like it a lot. But still, for everyone listening at home, I know that...
No, if Glenfiddich is watching, we're open to suggestions on sponsors.
Now, how did you start your journey your journey into esotericism and mysticism, and starting to study Schwaller?
Right. It's a good question. I guess when I was in my teens, I was more of an artist, and I didn't really have any academic aspirations at all, and I was more interested in art and music. And as I got into my late teens, my tastes just got weirder and stranger, and I was just drawn to, I guess, very dark and unusual and strange forms of music, art, and media, anything that was kind of pushing the envelope, as it were. And I just followed those affinities, and eventually it led me to, I guess, occult imagery, and that really opened me up, and that opened me up into, I guess, at that point, it was more, I guess, left-hand path form of occultism, which was an entry point for me. It's not really where I am today, but it was an entry point, and then I realized there was an intellectual or philosophical component to that. What was initially just this instinctual impulse of mine to, and I kind of had a shift. I had I guess I was always always had an artistic temperament, and then in my early 20s that shifted into music, and I was bumming around playing in bands for a while. And then some years after that, my creative emphasis shifted again into a more intellectual domain. And I started taking this stuff more seriously and started researching the foundations of these things that I was drawn to. And eventually, I just became... I had this innate sort of tendency for scholarly rigor, and I wanted to get to the bottom of... I wanted to go to the sources all the time and see where everything came from, and to know its origins. And that process led me deeper and deeper, to the point where I thought, well, I might as well go to university and get some credit for all this kind of research and writing I'm already doing. And that's how I wound up going. But by the time I was 24, I had started university. But I'd had several years of just being a kind of guess the freelance esoteric researcher, and that kind of gave me the foundational research skills, which really did me well through university. I was already a good researcher and writer before I even did my first undergraduate course. So, and really, the academic path for me is an extension of my esoteric quest, I would say, because it was a means of deepening and making more rigorous, my quest into esoteric traditions.
And you went to school, like you're in New Zealand right now, but you went to school on the Gold Coast. Is that correct?
Yeah, I went to high school on the Gold Coast of all places. I was born in New Zealand, but my parents moved to the Gold Coast when I was in my mid-teens. So my entire high school experience was in Australia, and I've always had an ambiguous relationship with Australia. I never felt that I fitted in terms of the demeanor of the country and the landscape and the climate and everything like that. I always longed to be somewhere else. But recently I felt the call to come home to New Zealand at least. And I finally made the move about 4 months ago, end of last year, and wound up here in Karekare, which is on the west coast of Auckland. And it's kind of beautifully isolated here. It's separated from the main city by the Waitakere Ranges, which is this beautiful, mostly manuka trees. You've probably heard of manuka honey. We have these manuka trees where the bees get, the manuka honey.
The Italians do an acacia honey.
Oh, right. Interesting.
Which I saw when I was over there last summer.
So, and I've even got a friend here who's a beekeeper, and he's very holistic in his whole approach to beekeeping. So it's kind of cool to see that process. But I know it's kind of like I've wound up here, and it's this beautiful spot overlooking the ocean. It's like spectacular views. It's rugged. It's in winter it's windy as fuck. It's pretty crazy, but it's a perfect kind of retreat for me and since I've been here, I've been wrapping up some freelance translation projects in order to buy time to get back to my own writing and publishing projects. And so for the last month or so, I've been sort of solidly back on my own work, which feels really good. And I've actually just released a book this past week, which I've just announced. I literally just announced it before coming on this show.
Wow.
So if you poke around, there'll be some links. But it's a really good space to be in. I'm feeling kind of it's taken a while to get here, like not just literally in terms of getting to New Zealand, but also slogging through the freelance work I've had to do to buy time to get back to my creative work, But now that I'm here, it's great. It's great.
Now, you notice that there's a difference between Australia and New Zealand. Is this mostly cultural, or do you notice like they're, as somebody who has been interested in the esoteric for quite some time, do you notice a difference in the individuals in terms of their connection to, either whether you want to call it the other world, the spiritual world, what have you? Is like you feel more home in New Zealand either because it's home, or is it a spiritual thing?
Kind of. It's funny now that I've been here
Is there a different cultural operating system in New Zealand, even though it's so close by to Australia?
Yeah, they're different. I mean, it's like saying it's comparable to the difference between Canada and America, or USA. very close, but you wouldn't. I mean, to the external observer, they may be similar, but you ask a Canadian or an American, and they're like, no, we're very different. It's kind of like that. There is a friendly rivalry between Australia and New Zealand, which sometimes can get unfriendly. But yeah, it's funny because the New Zealanders here, well, more than one New Zealander here. When you mention Australians, they say, they're all just criminals. They're all like
they're not doing hakas in the street or anything at each other.
Colony.
Like the rugby
yeah.
team.
So there's. So I say that again.
I said they're not doing hakas in the street like the rugby players do at each other.
Yeah, not that
You've seen those? The All Blacks haka?
Oh, I've seen them.
Oh, haka. Right.
On the rugby fields, yeah.
I've seen that. I don't encounter it on the streets yet. But
Alex, if you do, you have to just go run in the other direction. Just don't get involved because some stuff's going down. Now,
there's definitely a difference in temperament. As much as you can generalize about a whole nation, there's definitely a difference in temperament.
It's kind of the same thing with Canadians. There is always the joke that it's always cold up here in Canada. Like, well, it's the end of March. It's the last day of March, and, well, surprise, we're getting 10 centimeters of snow in the next 24 hours. So certain things tend to be that way, and there's always the stereotype of all Canadians like hockey. I'm like, I actually don't watch hockey all that much. I prefer UFC personally, but in terms of the things that kind of keeps everyone the same, or at least I find it's our ability to think beyond just the physical side of humanity and think more towards the spiritual connection. What makes us the same as individuals, which is more towards our ability to care, our ability to seek knowledge, our ability to yearn for truth. That's something that's ubiquitous, pretty much throughout any culture, at least to my knowledge.
Yeah. I think Schwaller actually makes this comment that he says the land shapes the man, and that's I think that runs deeper than we realize. Because I was born in New Zealand, but I've lived longer in Australia. I lived an entire Saturn cycle, a 28-year cycle in Australia, and that has the landscape in a natural sense, but also in a spiritual sense, has an impact on shaping your psyche, I think, and as well as cultural influences. That's another layer. But
that sounds like a Stoic philosophy.
A Stoic philosophy?
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. But I have experienced that. So as much as I feel New Zealand is more my home in some sense, I really have to acknowledge that the fact that I've lived so long in Australia has had its shaping influence on me. And I've got family in Australia, so I have connections there. So I don't want to perpetuate this kind of like dichotomous rivalry between the two countries, although it's fun to kind of play with sometimes. I'm not sure if you guys have seen The Flight of the Conchords.
Yes.
There's an episode where they've got the war against the Australians, and they're like, we're in a race war, the New Zealanders versus Australians.
Oh, well, my sister my sister lives in Melbourne, and she's from Canada, and we're of Croatian descent, so there's a lot of mixture of potential cultures and perspectives there. And she's just like, I came in, I adopted my Australian football team with my husband, and we just kind of, I stay out of it. Like we're Croatian, Canadian with Australian, and if the New Zealanders want to be able to do their thing, that's fine. And it's interesting to see her because now she actually has an Australian accent, at least a little bit. Right. You go down there, and so she's adopted that point. My interest is, you spent some time in Europe as well. Is that correct? If I'm not mistaken, or I may have heard that.
Yeah, I've traveled to Europe. I haven't lived there for, I've only traveled there, but definitely, yeah. I did my PhD research in Europe, so I was kind of, I was following in the footsteps of Schwaller de Lubicz in some sense. I was tracking down some of the places he lived and worked. So I went to Saint Moritz, which is actually in Switzerland, where he founded they call it the scientific station of Suhalia. It was kind of an alchemical laboratory and workstation, a spiritual and initiatory retreat. He made alchemical preparations there. And it's in Saint Moritz is like Nietzsche actually lived there, and Nietzsche said of Saint Moritz, he said it's 6,000 feet beyond man and time, and it's way up in the Alps. It's amazing, you know. So I went there, and I went to a place on the Azure coast, just about 20 minutes from Nice, called Ez. It's a small little fortified village called Ez. And the arms of that village, Schwaller draws attention to the arms of this village because it shows a phoenix rising from a human femur or a human thigh bone. Mm-hmm. And the motto inscribed on that emblem says "Moriendo renascor," which means "In dying, I am reborn." So it has this whole alchemical rebirth motif, this idea of palingenesis. You're born from your bones and your ashes into a new being. But yeah, that was very much a part of my trip to Europe. It was very much following in the footsteps of Schwaller de Lubicz, Nietzsche to some degree, and Jean Gebser, who was another figure I was studying at the time.
I was listening to one of your other interviews before the show, and kind of something that caught my curiosity, if I could maybe conjure up a detail you were talking about before, but it was something about Schwaller, and he was talking about, I think the word thick salts is an alchemical idea.
The fixed
I never read across that in
fixed
the reading
salts.
on Schwaller that I did. It was fixed salts or?
Fixed salts.
Fixed, yeah. That's a idea. It does come up in Schwaller. It's in his magnum opus, The Temple of Man, the big, volume one. The main place where it gets explored is in the memoir by André van den Broek. It's a book called Alchemy. Was published in 1987, and André van den Broek was a Belgian-American guy who came into contact with Schwaller in the kind of couple of years before Schwaller died. So this is in 1959, 1960 maybe. And he was in kind of in daily contact with Schwaller in the last years of Schwaller's life. So, and Schwaller kind of conveyed all this essentially alchemical information to this guy, who wasn't really an alchemist or anything, but he just received this whole Lubitzian download, I suppose you could say. And I think, like years later, he wrote this memoir of this whole experience, and it's just like it's a gold mine for Schwaller's detailed alchemical beliefs, and among what really chief of place among those was this idea of the fixed salt. It's this mineral. It's the mineral layer of being. For Schwaller, he says we've got in our bones, the mineral aspect of our being. There's part of us that cannot be destroyed. So if you burn bones down to ashes, and you can't. You burn ashes.
You get mineral salts and things like that.
Yeah, it's these alkaline salts in the ashes that. You just burn those things, and they don't. You can't destroy them. You can lose them. You can. They can get dispersed, but you can't actually destroy them. And this represented a fundamentally mineral layer of existence, which is immutable. And Schwaller's claim was that our embodied consciousness is somehow inscribed on this immortal mineral nucleus. And that was the means by which our consciousness, or at least the most important moments of consciousness, transmitted beyond our death.
Now the thing with consciousness, and I'm more of a philosopher. Alex is more of the alchemist, or the alchemical
salt crystals, DMT crystals.
He's more along that side. I'm more the philosopher and symbolist. I've listened to a lot of Graham Hancock's discussions on consciousness, and a lot of Terence McKenna's work. I've been starting to get into that with regards to how certain drugs or certain substances can, like ayahuasca, which is DMT, can
melt your mental operating system,
or at least be able to shift it into into that different plane, and it's brought into question what consciousness is as a whole, whether and that kind of leads into the whole idea: is consciousness attached to spirit? Are they the one and the same, or are they separate things? And kind of the main point for me, and a lot of other people, and Alex may know a little bit about this, but I'm kind of a layman when it comes to some of the more esoteric teachings, like for Gnosticism and Hermeticism. I'm a Freemason. I'm a 32nd degree, but I focused more on the symbolist side of things instead of going off on tangents. And a lot of people tend to interchange Hermeticism and Pythagoreanism, or the Pythagorean systems, or alchemy, or the other esoteric arts out there. How does one start to kind of untangle this ball of teachings? Like where's the first step?
Right. Well, for me, at least, I'm very interested in tracing the Egyptian origins of Hermeticism and how that unfolds from there. And I think generally I mean, a lot of esoteric traditions like to trace their origin to Egypt. It's a theme that comes up even in European times, and I'm sure in Freemasonry, as in Rosicrucianism, and almost, most of these traditions claim an Egyptian origin of some kind. Now, historically, a lot of it is hard to justify, but with Hermeticism, when you look back at and we have a Hermetic corpus written in Greek and partially in Latin, the Corpus Hermeticum. Now, for a long time, people thought that was older than Plato, and they attributed Hermes Trismegistus a greater antiquity than Plato himself. And Plato, is like 5th century BCE Athens. So when Marsilio Ficino came to translate the Hermetica in Renaissance times, it was the Medicis who kind of patronized him and said, so what? It was when there was a Renaissance, it was a rebirth of classical wisdom, and they were translating the Hermetica before Plato because they thought the Hermetica was older than Plato. But after philologists later came along and went, well, for all these reasons, the Hermetica seemed to be datable to like the early centuries of the Common Era. They're not as old as people thought they were, and which is true. I mean, the actual texts were written down in the late Antiquity, in the Hellenistic period, but what happens when you look at the content of those texts? Because a lot of the thing is with when you're dating texts, you can date a text to a certain period, but it's like the ideas in those texts can go back a lot further, and that's exactly the case with the Corpus Hermeticum. There was a Danish Egyptologist called Erik Iversen who did a fantastic study called Egyptian and Hermetic Philosophy. Sorry, I think it might have been Egyptian and Hermetic Cosmology. But anyway, he did this like detailed comparison of the Egyptian Shabaka stone, which is the Memphite cosmology, the Egyptian cosmology arising from the town of Memphis in Egypt. Mm-hmm. He rigorously compared that with the Hermetic corpus, and showed how there's these not only broad themes are very, very similar, but also in levels of detail, which I can't even go into here. There's these deep coherences between these texts, enough to show really that there is a genuine Egyptian origin of the Hermetic texts. And the texts themselves actually say this, but on the other, so if we have this idea that the Corpus Hermeticum can be legitimately traced to Egyptian origins, or Egyptian cosmological kind of teachings, that pairs up very well with accounts of Plato and Pythagoras going to Egypt and learning from the temple priests. Okay, we have accounts in Antiquity that Pythagoras and Plato, among others, learned directly from the Egyptian priests in the temples. So there's a sense that the Egyptian temple knowledge, the temple wisdom, and the sacred arts, the ars hieratica, did come down to the Greek world through people like Plato and Pythagoras, but also through in later antiquity when the temples closed. A lot of these traditions flooded out into the Hellenistic world, and the Corpus Hermeticum was one of those streams. The Greek magical papyri was another one. The Gnostic texts at Mount Hammadi turn up around the same time. We have all this.
There's also very obvious architectural influences on the Ionic columns and things of that nature.
Yeah. So there are, and that forms a historical basis in late antiquity, but also with deeper roots, where you can start to make a legitimate claim that there's Egyptian wisdom that was streaming into the world during its heyday, or its late heyday, but also when the temple started to close and become disenfranchised. And what's interesting there is that especially with the Greek magical papyri, it becomes very syncretistic. Now, you get Greek mythology woven in with Hebrew divine names, and as well as Egyptian invocations, and it's all the stops are pulled out, and they just go kind of wild and blend it all together.
Now, Wayne, one of our chatters one of our denizens who are in our YouTube chat, who we get questions from our listeners to be able to ask directly to our guests, and he actually had a very good one. And you spoke of the it was the Corpus Hermeticum. What is the recommended or most accurate translation that you would say that people should get or start with?
Okay, there's probably two. Well, there's three main translations in English. There is the Walter Scott Hermetica, which is problematic in terms of for a number of reasons, in terms of its translations. But it's good because it gives you the Greek text. If you want to look at the Greek, you can. But for most people, that's a little bit too technical. He also made a lot of changes and amendments to which is a large. Really, that's where the problematic aspect of his work comes from. He wanted to sort of change things to fit how he thought about it. There's a translation by Copenhagen, which is pretty good. And there's one, I always forget the actual name. It was a team of translators. There was 2 or 3 people that translated it, and it's called The Way of Hermes. The book is called The Way of Hermes. And it also includes a text called The Hermetic Definitions, which was translated by a French scholar called Mahe. So that has another text in it that you don't normally get in the other editions. So Copenhagen is great, and the group of translators who did the edition called The Way of Hermes is great. So either those two are good to go to. If you want Greek, go to Walter Scott. If you want Greek and you read French, go to Festigia Knox edition. Festigia was the French translator, and Arthur Darby Knock was the the philologists, the classical philologists, to establish the Greek text. But I mean, that's probably too technical for most people.
Okay, now, one of the big things that I notice, and even I made this mistake when I first got into esoteric teachings, and whether it's a mistake, whether it's true, the idea that that Hermes, thrice great, is connected to Thoth, which some people will still connect to, let's say, Enoch, as as so sometimes the names are interchangeable. How does one kind of sift through this, and what is true? Because there are tons of websites out there that will say, okay, Thoth is Hermes, Hermes is Thoth, and then say, okay, well, all three are also Enoch, which is potentially an entirely different kettle of fish. And Enoch is important in his teachings in Freemasonry, especially in Scottish Rite. So, is there a connection? Is there not a connection? What is the real scoop on that?
I think personally, I'm very sympathetic to perennial philosophy, which is the idea that really, like, the kind of archetypal essence of a divinity can have different cultural expressions. And so, but even back in the ancient world, they had what was called an interpretatio Graeca or an interpretatio Romana, a Roman or Greek interpretation, where they would transpose gods from another pantheon into the gods that they knew,
like Zeus being Jupiter, etc., etc.
Certainly, I mean, it was well known and established between Greek and Roman mythology. But also the Romans did this when they encountered the Germanic tribes. When they were starting to expand to the more northerly parts of Europe.
That's part of what makes the alchemical tradition nauseating to a lot of people. all those spins on the same.
That's the thing, though. I mean, alchemy is really the path of extracting essences. And if you do this in a comparative mythological sense, you've got a million different forms of manifestation. But how do you extract the essence of those? What is the bedrock that you can withdraw from that? And I think that's important. You need to be able to distill the nature of the divinity that you're trying to apprehend. But certainly among the Greeks, they did link their own divinities to. When they looked at Egyptian divinities, they often compared them to their own native divinities, and so there's definitely lines of connection that you can draw based on classical tradition rather than our own speculation. And the Thoth Hermes Mercury connection is a legitimate one. I'm not so sure about Enoch. It's just not an angle that I have explored. I wouldn't rule it out. I've got a colleague, Kyle Fraser, who he's a specialist on Zosamos, the alchemist, the Egyptian alchemist, Zosamos of Panopticus, and there's some interesting connections with Zosamos in the Book of Enoch, because in the Book of Enoch there's this passage which references the origins of alchemy and how the Nephilim come down and they mate with human women, and they teach in exchange for sex. Basically, they teach all these divine arts, among which is essentially alchemy. And this is one of the myths of how alchemy comes into the world. And that's in the Book of Enoch.
Excuse the pun, yeah.
So like, you give us sex, we will give you magic. That was kind of, a metaphysical type of whoring out. I'm guessing of the human people.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. Pimping yourself out for divine knowledge,
Now we always try and get this out of the way here because the ancient astronaut theory gets thrown around a lot, and we think it's a possibility.
Legacy is the ultimate currency.
Okay, well, true. But at the same time, the legacy that we're trying to be able to build here is one of rationality versus, in spirituality within somewhat scientific means. How much credence do you place on the ancient astronaut or ancient aliens theory? Specifically, I'm going to try and point towards the more reptilian aliens. Like, do you think
Right.
what do you think the possibility? And I have to ask this just to be able to get it out of the way. We do it every single show.
Okay.
Do you think the Queen is possibly a reptilian alien? Because we think that's bullshit. Personally, that's something I rail against on a constant basis. So,
that's not the kind of interpretation I would go for.
We rally against the Uber conspiracy.
That's kind of British understatement for no, it's bullshit.
Okay.
I think there's definitely comparative mythology definitely points to something happening. I mean, this Enoch myth, for instance, is just one among many, where you've got this, beings coming from, they call them gods, or fallen angels, coming and transmitting some kind of arcane gnosis or technology to humankind. I mean, that is comparative mythology. That is undeniable. That something happened. I do not think it was aliens or reptilians.
Modern geneticists should be able to rule out something like panspermia, you would think. I keep wanting to come back to the notion of like alchemy and the salts in the alchemical tradition. We were chatting with Doug the other day about the evidence of salts inside the pyramids, and like when you follow the chemistry route, you end up with something that has at least the potential for an empirical understanding of the universe. There's 1,000 flavors of salvation. The internet is a blender, an ugly blender of all of these 1,000 forms of salvation. Three men in the room here that have attempted to digest a lot of what's down the rabbit hole on the internet, and just where do we go in terms of function?
Well, that's the thing with the internet.
How do we move forward?
Well, that's why I stopped reading stuff on the internet. This is one of the reasons why we have the show, because we get people like Aaron on here to be able to tell us. Because I can go on a bunch of websites who are going to tell me a bunch of hooey, and why would I do that when I've got somebody who's been spending his entire life teaching it? So, if the idea of the possibility of some type of contact, or the possibility of some type, whether it's spiritual, whether it's metaphysical, whether it is extraplanar, and I'm speaking on very basic terms, because there are a lot of the religious texts do deal with pretty much all of them actually deal with otherworldly contact from angels, from spirits, or what have you. I bring forward Ezekiel as a perfect example of that. I used to freak out my grade 11 religious teacher with that book.
Yeah.
Now, the idea is this something that was, and I'm going to touch on Gnosticism with this a little bit. How does this lead, or how does the current modern interpretation to you deal with things like Gnosticism in terms of the demiurge and how they viewed religions, other religions at that time?
Right. Well, I'll just back up for a brief step.
Yeah, I sometimes go a couple steps
I'd
ahead.
like to avoid the spaghetti chronology approach.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's definitely go down the Gnosticism road, but before we do, I just want to clarify the issue. My main problem with the ancient alien argument is that it is ultimately materialistic, even though it's in a fantastic and unconventional way. It's basically saying, some beings from another planet got this technology and came and messed with us and seeded our civilization. At the end of the day, it's got this kind of quasi-scientific materialist slant to it, which is not how the ancients viewed divinities. The divine nature of reality is divine, and if you push this into a non-dualist interpretation, where the physical and the metaphysical are fundamentally interwoven, you don't really need to make quasi-scientific justifications for this kind of thing. Does that make sense?
It does. It's also a matter of if we're talking about Gnosticism within that regard.
What lens do you want to use to look at it? So
like, is it the...
We're all familiar with a few lenses here.
Well, Gnosticism's a good one. I'm happy to talk about that.
Okay.
Would you want to just give me your take on it, just so I know where you're coming from? Because there's, talking about Gnosticism, there can be 10 different perspectives on it.
Gnosticism in terms of being able to find truth, finding that second rebirth, in terms of kind of having the realization of what you are and what your place is within the universe. At least that's kind of how I kind of view that Gnosticism, that awakening of your own spirit. And for me, I could say that I had my own Gnostic, and I'll use myself as an example in this because that's the best one I know, I guess. I had my realization that the idea of the divine, there was a great there was a great architect that there's some intelligence, whether fourth dimensional, fifth dimensional, what have you, that somehow it manifested this three-dimensional universe into being. Now, at the same time, that person could be that being could be omniscient and be able to see everything and anything in this entire universe at once. But there's no necessary possibility that he could be actually concerned with, whether I am at 15 in the washroom with a magazine, doing what 15-year-olds in the washroom with a magazine do. And,
right.
Never mind what's going on in other places that have wars and what have you. But there are, other spiritualities that claim divinity through, or, divine right through some kind, and that being seems to have had a direct hand within human evolution throughout some point. So there's, there was a kind of something I was trying to be able to figure out, which was, if there's an all-knowing, all-seeing being out there who is supposed to have created the entire universe, why the hell is he going to care about, the small little XYZ thing that I did when I was 15, and that thing could potentially put me to hell.
I appreciate what Aaron's doing here, trying to peel back the layers of the onion on the term Gnosticism. Because Gnosticism can mean seekers of knowledge. It can be a historical reference to the Nag Hammadi library and the writings of the Gnostics. You've got you can connect the dots with the Essenes.
Okay, well, understandable. I'm trying to...
You've got the conceptualization of deity coming in here.
I'm trying to more parse it towards the idea of the actual, the idea of awakening versus being able to understand the world versus the idea of, let's say, dogma that has some type of divine background. So the idea of Gnosticism within the idea of the text versus, the history. And
sure.
Are you following me on that,
so
or am I
we definitely have not given you a straight answer to that question.
I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
We're just parsing it out here.
It's good for me to know where you're coming from. No, how you characterize it is good for me. I mean, this idea, gnosis in that sense of like it's what Plato called anamnesis. Anamnesis was the Greek word for memory. It's a remembering of your divine origin. It's with that moment when you realize that you are an immortal soul. You're not just this contingent mortal being. And so it's a not just any knowledge, but it's a knowledge that redeems or saves you from your mortality in a way by remembering that you are ultimately immortal. So that there's that form of gnosis, which is knowledge, but it's not just any knowledge. It's divine redeeming. It's knowledge of your divine origin, which in the Gnostic texts is said to be higher than the demiurge. The demiurge was this in the Gnostic text. The demiurge is a kind of evil creator god who created the material world as we know it and enslaved souls within it for its own devious purposes, and entraps us here, and that's why we don't have knowledge of our divine origin. What's interesting there is that you get conflicting texts in the ancient world, where the demiurge is either seen as a positive deity, it's just a positive creator god, or it's it's a malefic deity.
Yeah.
it's an evil deity. So, and there's two fundamental ways of looking at the cosmos or the world or cosmology in a religious sense, and one is said to be world affirming, so the cosmos of the world is good inherently, or world denying, where you go, this place is fucked. I need to get out of here and get back to my spiritual origin and let all the chaos and sin and debauchery just go to hell. There's a dualistic way and a more, I would call it a more non-dualistic way of understanding that of the cosmos, and also the role of the demiurge in it.
No.
So when you look at Egyptian texts, they have the demiurge. In the Memphite cosmology, the god Ptah, who was the craftsman god, was the god mediated between the divine mind and creation itself. So, and Ptah was he was the craftsman god. And what's interesting is the word demiurge in Greek is the word for a craftsman. Plato uses this term as the principle that mediates between the eternal and the transient. The demiurge is, so it's this mediating principle between these two aspects of reality. So if you see reality as, or these two aspects of reality, essentially you could boil it down to the metaphysical and the physical, but they strike a mean term between these, and this mean term is the demiurge. Now, if you're dualistic, you'll see this as a bad thing, a limiting factor. If you're more non-dualistic, you'll see this as
false dichotomy,
it's a more positive light. And there is evidence. I mean, the Gnostic texts, the Nag Hammadi texts, and also the Hermetic corpus can often be very negative in their estimation of the demiurge and this material worldly life. They can be you often get the very dualistic negative slant on it. And one way, and some scholars have pointed to the idea that even in the Platonic texts, that there's kind of a hierarchy of reading, where when you start out you read the more dualistic kind of attitude and then as you progress through the readings or the initiations, you come to the more non-dualistic understanding or reading, and that sort of makes sense. That does make a lot of sense to me. So it's not like it's not static. You start out going, fuck, this world is, we're all mortal, we're all going to die.
The world doesn't fit neatly into a generalization. You sort of start out life saying, "Oh, the world is amazing," and then the world is terrible, and then the world is good. The world is bad. You hate the physical world; it's a dirty thing. I just want spirituality. Where I hate spirituality, it's fancy woo woo, and I don't get anything done. And it's sort of a luxury for people. You can't. You can be very quickly reminded of the necessity of the physical world when you start going hungry.
Well, that's one of the more interesting parts. Like when I first started looking at, when I first started getting into the esoteric traditions, I always thought of you've got a heaven, you've got a hell, the dualistic side, and from there I was able to progress and at least understand, and this is something I've been able to figure out myself, or at least kind of decide upon for myself. Is everything's a trinity. You've got your good, you've got your bad, you've got everything in between, which could be one thing, it could be 100 things, but there's always those three sides. There's there's your side, my side, and the truth. And the idea of dualism seems to be very old hat in a lot of ways, because there are so many either potential shades of gray, whether you're dealing with philosophy, whether you're dealing with spirituality. And the idea of the demiurge as a singular figure or creator god, and like looking at the Gnostic text, it's very gloomy, very pessimistic, and it seems to have been created in a time where that type of overall attitude was kind of prevalent, and whether it's a potential reality or an actuality is still something that's up to debate. But it's a pretty interesting philosophy. Now the idea of if you've got this evil trickster creator god who has enslaved souls for his own nefarious purposes for all of eternity, but our souls are supposed to be eternal. who created that demiurge, and if our souls are supposed to be above him, what's beyond that? Is that what the teachings are supposed to be able to lead towards?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you trace it back to Egyptian cosmology, I think that's the best place to really get some kind of bedrock on this question. And this Shabaka stone, or the Memphite cosmology, and the study by Everson, who really kind of made the connections between this cosmology and the Corpus Hermeticum, is a really good place to start. So basically, what you're dealing with is this divine mind, which is kind of latent, it's but it once. I mean, and this is something that feeds into Platonic texts. You get divine mind, and you get the idea of a logos. So the divine mind has like thoughts, or wants to articulate itself, wants to express its thoughts. So what it does, it generates, and the Egyptian texts are explicit. It generates a tongue and a mouth and teeth to articulate the thoughts of the divine mind. And almost like a spell, like evoking these thoughts, or this articulation of speech, almost evokes the cosmos as we know it, creation into being. It's like a spell. It evokes this into being. But what's interesting is that this cosmos, or this material realm of being that it evokes magically into being, is the body of this divine creative mind. Okay, so it's the divine mind calls its own body into being through its thoughts and its logos, its articulations. And so what you end up with is you can't really separate, they're not separate things. So the Shabaka stone talks about how the minerals and the stones and the trees they grow on the body of the divine, the primordial divine being. So the demiurge is really this mediating force which helps, it kind of embodies the creative powers of the divine mind, which help bring it into being in a physical sense. And on our, when you filter down to our level as an embodied beings in this kind of physical world, gnosis. What gnosis means is that you realize that your mind and the divine mind are one and the same. So there's no separation ultimately between the divinity, the divine mind, which actually generated through its logos, the physical universe as we know it, and our own divine soul. So we are, that's really, that's gnosis.
So essentially, it's a matter of saying that your mind and spirit are essentially one. Realizing that consciousness, that spirit, is more than just a collection of, it's more than just a being or physical being. It's also a spiritual being, and they're one and the same.
Well, your mind wants to tease those notions apart so that you can talk about it as a human being, but from the frame of reference of a ghost and a machine.
This is where alchemical philosophy comes, and also actual concrete alchemical practice comes into play, because they had the idea of what they call the tria prima, which goes back to Paracelsus. And tria prima, they talked about this trinity. It's a Trinitarian idea. And they expressed it in terms of sulfur, mercury, and salt. Now, this they explicitly likened this to the Christian Trinity, but also to the idea of the spirit, the soul, and the body. And it's a trinity, but it's a unity. It's a tri-unity.
Sort of like the Venn diagram on the top of the Kabbalistic tree of life with Ein, Ein Sof, and Ein Sof Or. You've got everything, nothingness, and infinite light. It's like the three overlapping circles Venn diagram, but it represents the Godhead notion.
Definitely. And so there's this, and Schwaller is very explicit about this. He says, for anything to come into being, for anything to be in a concrete sense, three forces need to be at play, and Gurdjieff says exactly the same thing. But in alchemical terms, it's sulfur, mercury, and salt. And to understand this properly, you need to realize that even in a purely chemical mineral sense, we have cinnabar. Right, cinnabar is this red-black kind of crystalline stone, and it's literally, I mean, in a scientific chemical sense, it is the salt of sulfur and mercury. And when I say salt, I mean it's a neutralization reaction between an acid and a base. Okay, so the acid being sulfur takes the acidic role, mercury, the liquid metal, takes the basic or alkaline role, and acid and base, positive and negative, equalize or neutralize in a salt, chemically speaking. And in that particular instance, the salt is cinnabar. It's red crystalline stone. So if you look at Schwaller's whole thing was that he looked at reality as a neutralization reaction between metaphysical and physical forces. And this is a very non-dualistic perception, where, and in alchemical terms, sulfur is the father, and mercury is in a sense the mother, and salt is the son.
Which the way that I've looked at it is, if you need to be able for any type of creation to happen, you need to have the chaos, which is the rude material. You need to be able to have the final product, or at least the concept, which is the order, and then you need to be able to have the intelligence, which is the thing that makes it happen. So in that essence, the sulfur would be the chaos, the mercury would be the intelligence, and the salt would be that physical being that you want it to be able to manifest into. Yeah.
And the thing is, it's Trinitarian ideas, whether it's Christian, Trinitarian, or whatever, are notoriously tricky to pin down. When you try to map definite or specific definitions to each point of that triangle, it starts to get a little slippery. You think you've kind of pinned it down, and then it slips away, and that's just the nature of it. But what's another angle on it is, getting down to actual laboratory practice with alchemy. Certainly when, most alchemists, when they start out, they will start with the plant alchemy. And
that's because plant alchemy, you're less likely to blow yourself up.
Yeah.
Because antimony is a hell of a drug.
I mean, when you're getting to mineral alchemy, you're working with mineral acids and stuff, and it's dangerous. And actual hot furnaces, it's dangerous. Plant alchemy allows you to develop the kind of laboratory skills, the concrete skills, in a way that's not too dangerous, but it softens the process up. But you also learn the principles which carry over into the mineral and metallic work. So. And one of those is precisely this Trinitarian doctrine of sulfur, mercury, and salt, which in the plant kingdom, the sulfur is understood as the essential oil of a plant. The mercury is understood as the alcohol, the spirit, literally the spirit, the distilled alcohol of the plant.
With some more scotch on that one.
The body is, the salt is the body or the calcined ashes of the plant. So what that teaches you is that a concrete distinction between spirit and soul. I mean, these are also considered the spirit, soul, and body. Okay, so the spirit is literally the alcohol. The soul of a plant is the essential oil, so it has the aroma of the plant. Right, so if you extract the essential oil of bay laurel or rosemary, it's got a distinct smell, aroma, flavor. It's the soul of that plant. Whereas the spirit, which is this, you can distill spirit from just about anything you can ferment.
Yes, you can.
It's universal to the plant kingdom.
Have you ever?
So what that says. what that says is that the spirit is universal. The soul is more particular to the entity's body. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense, especially from the standpoint you're putting it into, and the idea of the spirit being the alcohol content. And again, Alex, if you could pour me a little bit more of that Glenfiddich as a
the spirit of the peach is with us tonight.
Well, the spirit, yes, and again, you can distill pretty much anything in there, and that idea of the Trinity being hard to pin down. Like we're getting into very metaphysical and philosophical stuff. So, I know that we've got one good question here that I want to bring up from Ellen, and she's actually been going through your website quite a lot, and she said that your site has an article on alchemy of Miami Vice. And if we're talking alchemy, and I know we're going to bring it more into the current world, but what is your thoughts on the alchemical influence in modern media that, for the most part, is over people's heads?
Well, when I do something like the Alchemy of Miami Vice, or I did a similar piece on the gnosis of Duran Duran. I don't know. I grew up as a kid in the 80s, so I did that. I take full responsibility for that. No, it's not so much. It's more interpretation, hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is a philosophical approach grounded on the principle of interpretation, how you interpret things, how you get meaning out of things. And now this idea of hermeneutics is the word is based on the name Hermes. Okay, Hermeneus in Greek meant a translator or interpreter. Mm-hmm. So in modern in 20th century or even 19th century philosophy, hermeneutics emerged as a philosophy of interpretation and deriving meaning. How do we do this process of extracting meaning from this world around us, whether it's text or anything? So when for me, interpreting Miami Vice as an alchemical opus, or the songs of Duran Duran as kind of Gnostic hymns.
You've managed to distill some deep principles out of the show.
Essence. It's an active hermeneutics or alchemical extraction of meaning or essence from something that would otherwise not have that esoteric meaning. So it's more coming from me than it is coming from the modern world of media. But it's my way of having fun.
Like a cognitive alchemy practice instead of a practical one.
Yeah, but really beyond that, at a deeper level, it holds water. All of reality around us, whether it's a Duran Duran song or a Miami Vice episode, is a gateway to a divine teaching or a path of gnosis. Everything that confronts our senses in a concrete way is potentially a divine experience, a gnosis.
It's like
so I play with it. I play with this with nostalgic things like Miami Vice or Duran Duran, but it applies to everything. We can interpret, or it's not just there's I don't want to say it's just an intellectual kind of game, which it can devolve into. It's more that everything we can everything that is given to us in a concrete material sense, in a sensory sense, mm-hmm. is the prima materia of the alchemy that we need to be doing. So everything that we already have the prima materia around us at every moment in our waking sensory lives, and that is the basis from which we can extract gnosis.
I would be very interested to hear about the the duality, or the hermetic basis for U2's Achtung Baby. Like, the with or without you, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Like, there are some very deep songs on that album, and it's one of the greatest rock albums of all time. I would strongly recommend you go out and listen.
I kind of want to jump away from the mental maps for a second here. And,
I think this
my mind is burning to try to connect the dots between. On yesterday's show, at the tail end, we were talking about the evidence of finding salts in the chambers of the pyramids. We spent over a month now doing, pyramid madness for March, the alchemical salts, and then just yesterday I posted. There's a 6-hour-long documentary that I posted to the wall for the Den of Lore on molten salt reactors and the future of nuclear, and how that would be the technology we would need to take into space. All the solar arrays that they're trying to do on the satellites would never work because you drift too far away from the sun. You'd need like a molten salt sort of nuclear reactor.
And, this is quite interesting because I'm pretty sure...
back around to the panspermia.
Well, the interesting part is...
Salts are definitely a key thing. We should talk about magical Egypt before we get too waylaid as well. But we can talk about salt.
I'm going to take us way off topic.
Let's talk about magical Egypt. Although I'm going to have to. I'm being requested to take a selfie here by my sister, and if she says that she did not, she's asked me. Actually, she is asking me to. So.
Is he have a dog ear or something coming in there?
Right. There we go. So
I have to take a quick bathroom break, so I'll be back in like 30 seconds.
Oh, that's fantastic. Alex and I are just gonna. Do your thing. So
it's a cat.
I'll leave you with the household cat.
Oh my god! If Coco were here, Coco would be attacking the screen right now.
We'll get the two cats talking.
Don't even get Coco involved in this. So I had my conversation with Baval, on last week today, and Coco was literally all up in my grill for the entire thing, and Baval's like, "That's a very strange cat." I'm like, "Yeah, she's my official co-host." And
ooh.
Well, it's even on the that's on the website. Well, she thinks she's the official co-host, but she's a lot more warm and cuddly than you are, unfortunately.
Thank God.
So I have to say,
it's not that kind of show.
I know it's not that type of show. Like, now we're doing video, but it's not that type of video. My big thing, we're going to be talking magical Egypt too, and I know that Chase has been upping the ante with the graphics on this. I am very eagerly awaiting the release of this.
It's going to be like this
series.
Week, right?
Well, it is.
Can you pull that up now?
Let's double check it here. Let me just bring it up. Let's see here. Wayne also
have the fan base pull it up.
Wayne writes, "Hey Alex, there is also liquid salt batteries that are fairly cutting edge for grid level storage. FYI, so just for your information."
Amazing.
And I'm just going to.
I want to suddenly know everything there is to know about liquid salts, pyramids, and alchemy, and the combination of the three.
Magical Egypt.
So spiritual, so empirical at the same time. I can't help myself.
I can't even type. So Magical Egypt. And Aaron, if you're joining back on, I just switched the video feed from your camera to the Magical Egypt website, just so that everyone can get a grip on what we're going to be talking about. Now, if you've listened to the program, we've been talking about Magical Egypt quite a lot. And we tried to get through a Magical Egypt Fight Companion with Randall Carlson. We had Duncan Trussell on. We had the guys from Grimerica. We had, Cameron was on. We had Michael Parker from the Electric Pyramid. It was a packed show. We got about halfway through one episode until, it was just a giant knowledge fest for 4.5 hours. Now, I've been waiting for this for a couple of months since it was about to be released, and Aaron is one of the researchers. First of all, we've had Graham Hancock on the show. His research is included in the show. Obviously, John Anthony West's research is included in the show. Richard Casaro's research is going to be included in the show, and Aaron's research is also going to be included in the show. So I am very interested to hear. Aaron, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, I'm not seeing you on camera at the moment, unless I'm.
Camera's looking at the ceiling there.
I'm back. I'm here.
Okay, one second here. Let me just.
freeze framed.
Bring that up. Oh, there we go. And he's back. Oh,
there's a
thank you very
handsome
much.
devil himself.
This is why I need to unbutton another shirt. Button. I'm just gonna bring that down.
You
here.
keep that
just to be able to keep that.
It's not that.
No.
It's a family show.
It is, but the guest is looking very stylish, and I'm feeling a little bit overdressed right now. I have to take it down a notch, and there we go. That's better. So
whiskey helps.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And, we even have a window open here. It's minus. It's -5 outside. We've got a window cracked, and I think these new curtains.
Yeah, window. Actually, let me crack a window. It's a good idea.
No, I've actually seen through the reflection of your glasses, and this is the beautiful part about high-definition video, that it's a very beautiful day out there.
Yeah, it's nice here. It's autumn here. We're the opposite kind of you guys in terms of weather.
Not really. No, you're not. Well, yes, you are, but you're getting to the
classical seasons. Yes. No, it's actually quite a sunny day outside. Which it's very changeable here though. But the seasons, the shifting seasons are felt definitely.
Now, for Magical Egypt, this is a series that has been well weighted for a long time. I've been talking with Venice. Fairly often about the release, and we had a chance on the show a while ago. Just
all right.
Well, how long ago did you? It was like a random. It was a random. Like we were doing a Magical Egypt fight companion, kind of like along the veins of Joe Rogan's UFC fight companions. But we had so many knowledgeable people on the show that we got about halfway through one episode, and then Randall Carlson just started giving all this information out. So we had to. We didn't get through the entire one, unfortunately. But I want to be able to get Chance back on to talk about Magical Egypt 2 when it comes out. Now, your research is going to be featured on it. I'm very excited for this release. How does your research play into the new series?
Well, I'll answer that in an indirect way. I'll let you know how I came into the Magical Egypt world. I was living in Queensland at the time, and I was sort of loosely in touch with Venice because just online, and Robert Lawler was coming up to Queensland. He lives down near, in Australia, between the mainland and Tasmania, which is the island at the bottom. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of small islands, and on one of those islands, Robert Lawler was living. And Robert Lawler is, if you don't know, he was the English translator, the first English translator of Schwaller de Lubicz. Mm-hmm. But he's also written on a lot of sacred geometry and other things. So he was coming up to Queensland, and I'd arranged to meet. Well, Venice got in contact with me and said, "Hey, Robert's coming up. We should meet up." And I'd love to meet Robert and to meet you guys. And it didn't happen. We had a huge. I mean, right now there's there's crazy storms and stuff going on over there right now, and flooding. And back then, the same thing was going on. Crazy storms and flooding, and it just didn't happen. But eventually, it was about a year ago. Actually, it was February last year. We finally got together. I met Venice and Chance and Robert Lawler for the first time, and I just really hit it off well with Venice and Chance, and I just kept coming back to stay with them and work with them, and they sort of realized what I had to offer, and we just kept doing lots of interviews and filming various just me talking shit about interesting, well, presumably, hopefully interesting stuff. And yeah, the main things that we sort of go into from my angle, alchemy, but also the role of consciousness in shaping the transformations of art and culture, which is coming more from the angle of Jean Gebser's work. But no, we would hang out. We spent a lot of last year just hanging out, shooting the breeze about esotericism and philosophy and consciousness and tantra, and very, we drank a lot of margaritas. I want to say a fuckload of margaritas. And they're great cooks. They're foodies. I mean, the food I ate at their place is just sublime. And I don't know, they put truffle oil in almost anything you could, or things you wouldn't think truffle oil would go in, and it's just this transformative kind of.
The last time Chris had truffle oil, he ended up in a movie too.
You know what?
I don't get that. I don't get that reference.
All right.
Now, and we've had a lot of support from Venice and from the Magical Egypt crew to get the word out for a telethon to support John Anthony West's cancer treatment. I could just tell, if you spend a lot of time with her, I haven't met her in person because obviously we're on different continents, but she seems like an absolute sweetheart. And I just want to give her a quick shout out. I know that she's currently without power and dealing with an entire fridge full of food that could potentially go bad. So she's having some alchemical experiments going on right now with the fridge. Yeah. And my suggestion is just cook everything over an open flame. Like you're in Australia, just make a barbecue. You're fine. So, Venice, if you're listening, I hope you're okay and safe, and please do take care of yourself.
I think the worst is over, from what I gather from my Queensland, my family and friends in Queensland. So yeah, but they'll pull through. But the Venice and Chance are great. They're a really great team, and some people are maybe a little anxious about when the show's coming out, but I just want to say that Chance is a perfectionist, and he's a consummate artist, and those concerns are kind of paramount for him. He wants to put out the best show possible, and I think if that means delays or some certain looseness with time, then it's just kind of how it has to roll. And I know there's a lot of pressure and people want the show now, but and it's coming. I mean, from what I gather, it's so close it's not funny. But yeah, I think it's worth the wait. If it means another couple of weeks or another month or whatever it takes, I'd say to people, hold out. We're getting there. They're working night and Chance works night and day on this stuff. There's a backlog of material, of interviews and various things. So once the first show comes out, it's just kind of it's like breaking the seal. Everything's just going to flow from there, and it's going to be good.
And for your section's more like the metaphysical alchemical side of it. What do you know from comparing the first Magical Egypt? And I know that with on Gordon's show Rune Soup, you did the question was are you aware of the series Magical Egypt? And pretty much everyone I know knows Magical Egypt. My wife, who is not the most non-metaphysical person or esoteric person on the planet, knows Magical Egypt because I made her watch it once. So,
right.
Comparing the first series to the second series, what are the major differences that you are finding so far? And what can people expect?
Right. Well, the first thing to expect is generally the quality, the production quality overall is going to be as I said, Chance is a perfectionist, and he's worked in the industry for a long time. And I think when he did the first series, it was under circumstances which were just pretty off the cuff. So by contrast, this is going to be much more professional in its production values. Secondly, you're going to have the big names that you know and love, but you're also going to have some new blood and some new themes and new ideas that you may not know, but you will come to know. So I guess I'm one of those new currents on the show, but there's others as well. So and also one of Chance's guiding themes for the new show, or at least the first episode, as I understand it, is the idea that art is a form of revelation of esoteric knowledge, and it is deep, archaic wisdom. This idea that these ancient cultures had a high level of consciousness and technology, but that they didn't transmit it in academic exegeses, or they encoded it in the art. So architecture was the message. The medium was the message, in a sense. And so one of the approaches Chance is really wanting to ground the new show in is this idea of how do we approach the artifacts in the art of the ancient world in a way that extracts that alchemical essence, or that ancient divine wisdom, which we all know is there, but various people argue about how what it means, or how it comes down, how it comes down to us. But it's there's a sense where it's it's actually written, it's actually hidden in plain sight. It's there in the physical monuments and the artistic expressions that come down to us.
Now, the interesting part is you mentioned the medium as the message, and this is just a synchronicity that I'm going to throw out there. Marshall McLuhan is the person who coined that term, and he's actually very good friends with my in-laws. They're neighbors, within the same area of Prince. He lives in Prince Edward County, so I get the occasional, the occasional free book from my in-laws that have been given to him, and it's a lot of knowledge that's passed down. So that is my synchronicity level 9 for the day.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool in-laws to have.
Well, they run a. This is the interesting part. They run a. And no, they're not patrons of the show, as it were, but still they gave me their daughter, so I'm going to plug their store. They run an antique shop called Dead People Stuff.
Was it their firstborn?
Their lastborn, actually. They're their youngest.
So. Okay, so they didn't sacrifice their firstborn, but close enough.
Oh, well, I'll take that as what it is, and if it's a burn, that's a good one.
No. I don't mean that in any way.
I'm curious, Aaron. Are you working on any Egyptian flavored spagyric tinctures or anything lately?
Not so much. No, not Egyptian flavored, but since I've arrived here in New Zealand, the people that I am, this place I'm staying at is
Egyptian recipe, not Egyptian flavored. I'm just playing with words here.
Egyptian flavored, of sand,
But the people I rent off these people who kind of own a lot of property in this area, and they're very spiritually minded people, and they're trying to create essentially a spiritual retreat area. And they also run a bunch of festivals and stuff in Auckland. And but yeah, I was speaking with one of the owners, and she really wants me to develop a spagyric range, an alchemical range of native New Zealand herbs. So that's something I'd really like to do. It's going to take me a bit of time to get the relevant equipment together. Because basically, right now, just about all my belongings, my worldly possessions, are in a storage box in Australia somewhere. If you've ever seen that scene, the final scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they box up the Ark and they wheel it in this big factory full of boxes that look exactly the same as the box that they've just put the Ark in. It's this huge factory full of boxes. That's basically kind of what the factory looks like where my worldly possessions are.
I'm picturing an episode of Auction Hunters where they're opening up storage lockers, but they find a spagyric alchemical laboratory inside of one of them.
Well, there actually is spagyric. There's some of my older spagyric preparations are somewhere in that box, and so basically,
what is a spagyric tincture? What does it do?
That's a good question.
Right?
When I was speaking before about
Do you want to
sulfur,
capture a
mercury, and
soul
salt.
and put it in a bottle, Chris?
Okay, well,
Yeah, it's just so in the plant alchemy, you separate the sulfur, the mercury, and the salt of a plant.
okay.
And the sulfur is the spirit. So in the plant, you ferment the plant until it gets alcohol in it, and you distill that alcohol until it's pure spirit. That's the separation and purification of the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
For the soul, it's the essential oil. It's the personality of the plant. So you do an oil extraction of the plant and refine it, so you got a pure essential oil. Because when you do oil extractions, you often the first extraction has this funky, nasty smell, which is called the phlegm. And so once you extract the oil, you got to refine it by further distillation to remove the phlegm and just have the pure aromatic oil. And that's considered that's the soul, because it's a personality, because it has the distinct properties you recognize as that plant. Like if it's from
Chris,
lavender,
Chris would be looking for oil of peat for Scotch.
Yeah,
if we explain it to him in
peat.
Scotch terms.
But if you extract lavender oil, that's lavender. But if you extract spirit from lavender, it's just alcohol. It's just pure ethanol. So there's nothing personal about it. And then the body of the plant is once you've extracted the spirit and the oil, you got this kind of mass left over, which is going to have all its qualities extracted, and you calcine that, you burn it down to ashes. And those ashes become, the longer you burn them, the more pure and the more white, the more fluffy they become, until they're the pure white ashes. And then those are the calcined alchemical salts.
Now, what would the purpose of these tinctures be? Like, is it strictly, like, if you're trying to be able to trap, like, essence, or if you're trying to be able to trap something, is there a reason that you would do so? Well, what is the end purpose? What is the product for?
Well, it's a medicine. It's a
Think better Scotch,
which is holistic in the sense that it's got normal herbal remedies. Simply just of a plant, an ethanol of some kind. But the alchemical one adds the calcined ashes or salts. So it's got the body of the plant. So you separate the spirit, the body, the spirit, the soul, and the body. You separate them, you refine them, and then you reintegrate them. You bring them back together. So you've got a purified spirit, soul, and body back as a unified entity. And that is a superior alchemical or herbal medicine than an ordinary herbal extraction. So what the purpose that serves is just increases the properties of that plant or herb. But if you look at, Tibetan alchemy is actually very explicit about this. They say when you can do medicinal extractions from minerals or herbs, and the whole point of those is to prolong the life or health of the physical body of the practitioner. And that buys you more time. It literally buys you more time. If you live longer or you're healthier, you have more time in this incarnation to achieve liberation in life. And that, Tibetan alchemy really places the physical alchemy in context, because the physical the material alchemy is just making medicines to live longer. But that's not an endpoint in itself. The endpoint is the point of your life is to achieve the spiritual body, the immortal essence. You got to extract the immortal essence from your mortal life, and that is the purpose. You got to achieve liberation in this body, in this life.
Now, how does this connect to monoatomic gold, and in any way? Does it?
I have no idea. Tell me more about monoatomic gold,
Alex. That's your thing.
There's multiple lines here that all lead towards immortality. The modern culture has transhumanism. You've got guys like Ray Kurzweil that are looking for the ability to live forever, downloading your consciousness into computers. You've got ancient shamanism. There's sort of a mental survivalism, being able to handle all kinds of different mental operating systems, combating with your brain so that you can live longer. You've got the pursuit of wealth so that you can live longer. You've got the pursuit of alchemy so that you can live longer. Everything sort of falls back to this notion of longevity. And there's a branch of alchemy, maybe haphazard alchemy, it goes back to supposedly back to Egypt and the work of Lawrence Gardner. They trace it back to the Mount Cerebit, where the Egyptians were apparently making monatomic gold, as found by the UK archaeologist Flinders Petrie. And there's sort of a parallel where alchemy and archaeology come together in the past, and there's some modern alchemical conferences, and I believe in the United States called the Enota, where David Hudson and what was the other gentleman? Don Nance, who was an American alchemist. They're trying to find monoatomic gold. So monoatomic gold is where they alchemically would take a piece of gold and then they knock it back and forth with the acids and bases until it breaks down into singular pieces of gold. And apparently there's some root of this in ancient Egypt, specifically in Mount Cerebit, as found by Flinders Petrie. So it's interesting.
Is that the same as colloidal gold?
Well, there's like colloidal silvers, but monatomics would take on a very specific properties for monatomic gold, where according to David Hudson and the labs that they sent this stuff through, it would reduce or increase in weight when it was heated. It would, when it was heated to particular levels, it would disappear from the visible spectrum of light. You get very unique properties. So it apparently was, what's the term? It was superconductive, essentially, as well. So maybe there's something to do with the superconductivity of monatomic gold and it disappearing from the visible light spectrum. So here you've got all these worlds colliding. You're deep down the rabbit hole, and you're like, there's something that's empirically interesting and spiritually connected at the same time. Modern alchemists are, is this what Fulcanelli discovered? Is this hogwash? We could test if it's hogwash or not. We could see, is it, if I make monatomic gold the proper way and I get the pH, exactly 10.78 and all these pieces of the recipe, I would have a lump of monatomic gold on the desk or on a heating plate, and it would disappear from the visible spectrum and come back when it was cooled down. And that would be like, now we've really got something really interesting here. We've got something that's empirically, visible, repeatable, testable, and has a connection to the ancient world. That's what makes it so interesting.
Is it like a solid material form, or
it's like a salt,
white powder,
like white powder.
Like a salt.
It's like cocaine, but instead of killing you, it makes you live longer.
It's alchemical cocaine, right?
They theorize that it interacts with the DNA in the body and sort of activates Adam-Cadman stuff, and you get into all sorts of hogwashy notions.
I can't with any kind of certainty talk about monoatomic gold, but there is in alchemical tradition this idea of colloidal gold or gold salts, and there is a tradition going fairly far back. And the thing is with gold is that gold is the royal or noble metal because, generally speaking, it doesn't react. You can't, nothing destroys it. It was only when they discovered
its use in getting closer towards immortality.
Yeah, well, it's the immortal body in the mineral kingdom or the metallic kingdom, So it is why it's always symbolically. It's always about the immortal body or the immortal being.
I just find it really interesting that if we have a physically a tangible, repeatable alchemical process where we've found a monoatomic. It disappears from the visible spectrum. It's not a philosophy anymore. It's now we're not looking at the world from a dualistic perspective where you've got the soul and the material world. Suddenly you've got evidence for maybe the merger of the two in a particular substance with unique physics properties.
I've heard of monoatomic gold, but it's not something I've looked into per se. My alchemical research is one thing it's shown me a thread for the idea of colloidal gold or gold salts. And the thing is, because gold is unreactive and most things can't even touch it or destroy it, for a long time it was this immortal substance. But at some point they developed mineral acids, like aqua regia was an alchemical term for like a royal water, which is able to dissolve silver and gold. And when you dissolve gold and you can kind of precipitate it down to its salts, you get gold chloride. It's a form of gold in its saline or its salt form. And that was used, that can be used in making colloidal gold, like you have colloidal silver. But it was also, and when you put it in a solution, it makes like this violet purple colored liquid. But some of the alchemists in the 17th and 18th century were doing this and putting it in glass. And there's a kind of glass called ruby red glass, or gold ruby glass, which is colored with these gold salts, so it's colloidal gold precipitate. And that was kind of, seems to be the secret behind the stained glass of the cathedrals, which was what Fulcanelli was looking at. And Schwaller de Lubicz was actually working with one of the figures behind the name Fulcanelli, was working with Schwaller on precisely just this. They're working on recreating the mysterious blues and reds of the Chartres Cathedral, the stained glass, the medieval techniques of stained glass making, which were alleged to be alchemical and not merely chemical. Because most stained glass was created just by adding oxides of various metals. So, iron oxide for red and copper oxides for green.
Have you ever seen a chemical experiment where they look at oil of pumpkin seed, which is actually, it's dichromatic. So you get yellow and then red out of one liquid substance, but there's a break in the color spectrum. So it gives you very strange color properties.
The same thing happens with glass stained with colloidal gold. There's actually an example of it in the Roman world. It's called the Lycurgus cup. It's this cup of glass. It's this elaborate carved glass cup, which I think it's in transmitted light it is green, but in reflected light it's red. And it's made of glass stained with colloidal gold, and colloidal gold is nanotechnology, right? It's nanoparticulated gold in it, and that's what's put into the molten glass.
I'm going to bring this up here actually because I've got it online. I'm just going to show it to the viewers at home. This is from Smithsonian Mag, and I'm probably going to get some flack for this at some point, if for anybody who's onto the whole giant conspiracy. So the
I'm a subscriber to the Smithsonian Mag.
Yeah, it's a possibility. So it's the cup is green, but through light it turns red, and it's right here on screen. So I'm just going to switch back so that we can see Aaron's beautiful face once more. There we go, and we're back in studio. So
what's interesting about that, right, is according to modern science, we didn't really have the mineral acids that could dissolve gold into its nanoparticular state until Jesus, it was like the 17th century, maybe, or give or take a century, right? It certainly wasn't back in Roman times. So you've got this cup, this glassware, which seems to be made of, nanoparticulated. What seems to be, has nanoparticulated gold properties, giving green and red color in a different light. What this suggests is that maybe they had knowledge of mineral acids back in Roman times. That's something that in the history of science is not acknowledged as far as I know. And I have an alchemical colleague from New York, Daniel Burnham, who I correspond a lot with, and I'm working with him on a translation or interpretation of a translation of a Greek alchemical lexicon. And he's got a particular interpretation where he thinks that he's made a pretty good case for the fact that this lexicon in these early Greek, Hellenistic Greco-Roman era alchemical texts allude to techniques for making mineral acids. And if you can make mineral acids with, back in those times, then you can make colloidal gold. And if you can make colloidal gold, you can make stained glass that has these dual properties. What was the term you used?
Monoatomic.
Dichromatic or
Dichromatic.
Or superconductive monoatomic gold.
Right. Okay. So that's what
we're talking about particles. The other one we're talking about the light coming off the particles. So they're interrelated. Yeah. Not all nanoparticles would be dichromatic by any means.
Yeah. So there's a very real possibility that this technology existed. I mean, the Lycurgus cup is telling for the very reason that, well, how would they make this if they didn't have mineral acids that could dissolve gold into its colloidal form to put into glass to make it, dichromatic? Explain that.
I don't think I could. In all honesty,
yeah, no, it's a rhetorical.
We know
if it wasn't so cool, we wouldn't be talking about it thousands of years later.
We know so little about the past. We know so little about what happened before. Hell, even like the 1800s, we don't know everything. And the idea that the ancients or the people who came 2,000 years before us or 2,000 plus did not have technology that we have today, or certain techniques that could produce certain technologies today, such as, let's say, batteries. And I know that there was a mention of the Baghdad battery. I honestly, I forget who said this, but the Baghdad battery could have been used to, not only
did
produce...
they find salt in it?
Well, okay. Well, think about it this way: like the Baghdad battery was used for power, but also, they say like, electrolysis, to be able to plate something in gold, and it could have been used for forgery of coins. Basically, you make coins that are silver, you plate them in gold, and it's going to cost you a lot less. And all of a sudden, you've got these gold coins that look gold. So the idea that they had this capability back then.
That is interesting, because the earliest, Greek and Demotic alchemical texts that we have, these are coming out of the Greco-Roman and Coptic period, are often recipes for faking, in a sense, metallic appearance, especially silver and gold. Because for the ancient world looked at metals in a different way than we do. They didn't have this kind of periodic table of elements and the purest kind of concept that we have. But metals were what they appeared and how they seemed to us in a visible and a tactile sense. And so that a lot of the recipes were like, well, here's how you make gold, and they're basically talking about faking gold or silver, and there's often a surface patina or coating that they seem to be referring to. There was a tincture they would say would stain or color the metal.
Didn't they have
gold or silver? But it just, so it seems like there's a method of coating a metal in silver or gold, but some of the other texts talk about what they call a deep tincture. It wasn't just a surface tincture. It was like they called it kata buffet is a Greek term, I think, like a deep tincture, a tincture that penetrated right through to the essence of the metal. So yes, there are there are techniques that allege a surface kind of transformation of the metal, but there are also ones that seem to go literally deeper and penetrate and transform the whole body of the metal.
And what was it that, Alex, you were talking about, that one guy who apparently was able to achieve actual immortality through his...
Fulcanelli.
Okay, well,
is the esteemed alchemist.
Okay, well, for that type of alchemy, like we're talking being able to find a philosopher's stone.
That's a whole other interesting notion. Like we talked to some people about alchemy and potential. The pyramid as a chemical factory and salts. I posted that 6-hour-long documentary where they were talking about molten salts and nuclear reactors with molten salts being the only thing that would really take humanity to the stars as an energy source. We're chatting about finding salts, evidence of salt inside the pyramids. That's very empirical evidence. It doesn't require much speculation. Alchemy, sorry, getting back to your question here, but alchemy in terms of interacting with the body, that is a very, very interesting thing that I feel like modern research could do. You could take spagyric tinctures, you could take monatomics, you could look at them interacting with organisms in a petri dish. How does superconductivity affect the human body? If it's inside of your body, that's a very interesting thing that could be empirically studied. That doesn't require any woo-woo-ness. People should do that.
That's definitely it's definitely a thing. But at the end of the day, I come back to the idea of, there are these definitely empirical physical aspects of alchemy that can be researched and explored in a non-woo-woo way. And some scholars are doing this. There's scholars like Principe and Newman who are reproducing the experiments of Newton and other alchemists in a laboratory setting. That they're translating the coded terminology of Newton's alchemical writings and other alchemists, and they're actually recreating their experiments in a chemical form. That's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think, for me personally speaking, ultimately, alchemy is not a biochemical phenomenon. That can feed into it and form a part of it. But ultimately, I think alchemy is the art of creating the immortal body. Or, I would say, instead of creating is a misleading term. It's more like restoring or rediscovering, because the immortal body already exists. It's primordial and ever present. So it's more like, I liken it to Michelangelo and the statue making process, where he said he would had this lump of rough-hewn stone. He would just take away the extraneous stone to reveal the primordially perfect statue. And that's really what the creation of the alchemical body is like. The immortal body, the immortal being, is already eternally present in us. We just have to remove the mortal parts. And Chris, you said you're a Freemason, and to me this strikes an important note of resonance, because obviously you have the idea of the stone, which is rough hewn, and the perfect stone, but also the idea of, in Freemasonry, of creating better men, and not just in a social or ethical sense, but in an esoteric or primordial sense.
Well, you're creating the internal temple.
You're shedding mental models, obviously, as well. So, alchemy, there's a spiritual quest in alchemy, and you have to distill the inner man, the inner mind.
Definitely.
But you could also say, well, maybe there is a discrete process here, and once human beings stop tripping over all these false mental models that we've created for ourselves, we might actually get towards that notion of immortality or understand.
And I think, in a non-dual sense, the physical
chemical
body,
consciousness interrelations.
in a non-dual sense, our physical body and our actual health and our diet and all these kind of aspects are not irrelevant. We can't just go, we're on a spiritual alchemical path now, so we don't have to worry about the physical being. It's like, no, they're all interrelated. And if you look at the traditional medicines of the East, Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, and which are intimately connected to their alchemies. So Chinese alchemy is very much intertwined with Chinese medicine and the internal arts of transformation, and the same in Ayurveda. In the Sanskrit term for alchemy is rasayana, which is still, rasayana means the path of essences, and rasayana in modern Ayurvedic medicine means it's a form of rejuvenation therapy. So there's often an overlap between the traditional medical systems and the body as we know it, and also and the subtle or immortal body. So we know in Chinese tradition we have a system of meridians and pathways of energy in the physical body, but a more subtle, energetic, network within our being, which is as real as our veins and nervous system. So this is where it's non-dual. The physical and the spiritual are intertwined and interwoven. The Chinese texts talk about how qi or energy follows blood. So we've got veins which carry our blood, but we've also got meridians which carry our vital energy. And so the point I'm making is that we can reduce it to a purely physical level, or we can reduce it to a purely spiritual level. Either would be misleading. The reality is that they're intertwined, fundamentally intertwined, and we have to engage reality as both a physical and a metaphysical phenomenon.
Now, my question is, how do cats play into this? Because as your cat is on your lap, my cat was on my lap for that entire conversation. It's
right.
like they could hear each other through the microphones, like their ears are that good.
Yes, they are.
And I'm going to, I know Alex
It's
kicked...
the perfect distraction from the metaphysical
Well, you kicked
journey.
Coco out of the studio, you jealous son of a gun.
They're needy little bitches.
We're trying to dig into the depths of the human psyche and the material world simultaneously here.
The Egyptians praised
work.
cats as gods. Why do you think that is? She's trying to tell us something.
They got too deep into the ghost in the machine, and only the cats could see their mortal essence after that happened.
Cats are our feline overlords, We think they're our pets, but they're just like ruling us.
Oh, well, we have I'm going to call him my production intern, Indy, and you haven't seen him because he never comes into the studio. He's a 12, 13-pound black long hair, the dumbest cat alive, but he will let you cuddle him like a teddy bear. So I could be laying down anywhere, and he will just like lay on the shoulder that is laying on the couch or on the bed. He will just lay on that side and just hold me. That's all he says, and that's all he wants.
Yeah.
And you pet him for a bit, and he just starts chewing on your fingers. Now, considering there is the idea behind Egyptians revering cats as gods, and the fact that cats have been seen as an otherworldly type connection creature, whether we're talking about witches or what have you. I'm going to ask flat out, have you looked into or seen anything with regards to felines and their some type of extrasensory perception or any type of ability to sense beyond the standard four senses? Have you looked into this at all? You have one.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think anyone that's ever had a cat knows that a cat will stare into some part of the room where there's fucking nothing existing and act like they're freaking the fuck out, like there's some demon there. Everyone that's had a cat has had that experience, and they're like, okay, this cat is seeing something that I am not.
All cats are schizophrenic. Or it's the
You know what?
the toxoplasma in the cats
Years
that are
ago, years
fucking
ago,
with their
I
heads.
was years ago I was walking. It was in Brisbane in Australia. They had an Egyptian exhibition at the museum. They had artifacts from around the world, and they, for some godforsaken reason, brought them to Australia for a short time. And I was going through this exhibition, and one thing struck me was that I had this kind of insight or realization, which has stuck with me, and it was the preponderance of serpents, but also cats in Egyptian iconography. And I realized, hey,
Yes.
both of
Vaporizers on
these
the mic.
both of these fuckers have like this slit iris, They have this like I don't know. I sense this deep connection between the serpent and the feline in the form of the eye. The iris has got this slit form, which is different, to our round.
Are you saying cats are dinosaurs evolved?
I don't know, and I mean, there's other creatures that have like a slit iris, like goats, but they're kind of horizontal, and
Presumably,
I sense
their inner
it's the deep.
consciousness is different than ours because of it.
There's just something there. I can't say it was more an intuitive perception for me, and I can't say I know the ultimate ramifications of it, but it did strike a very deep note of resonance, and I went, there's something there. There's something there. Serpents and cat or felines have this unusual connection in terms of their
Frog eyes also.
form of their eye.
Frog eyes are slightly different. Frog eyes are more of like well, they're similar, but frog eyes are more kind of like cylindrical, and they're more centered in the actual pupil.
Yeah, they've got like a
They're-
horizontal, but also
Yeah,
a vertical aspect. So
And
they're
their
like,
bodies are
and
coated in
and that's the
neurotoxins.
thing, so it's interesting because like frogs are amphibious, so that they exist between water and land. So it's like vertical and horizontal. I guess serpents are
They
more.
must have a very interesting consciousness to handle that.
Yeah, I mean,
To
what's it
literally
like
sit on the
perceiving
cusp between those two
what's it like
mediums
perceiving
constantly.
through an iris that is like a vertical slit or a horizontal slit or some fucking frog horizontal vertical split? You know?
It goes to show, like, if you look at the serpent throughout the ages, like, so the serpent is supposed to be considered wisdom, like it's knowledge. It is it's knowledge being power as far as the symbol is concerned. The cat is kind of the exact same way, but it's more of the physical hunter prowess style of wisdom. It's the survival aspect.
So you got the reptilian versus the mammalian expression. Yeah.
It also goes to show, and I again, we're going like way off topic here, but still try to keep it on
Where do you want to go?
That's good.
but
That's good.
we're still like keeping it on subject here, but at the same time, if you look at a cat's behavior, and I'm assuming it would have been the same throughout the last, several thousand years since they've been domesticated. So you're looking at a creature that can take care of itself, can feed itself, can groom itself, is able to kind of discern evil from not. Like, I had one cat who absolutely hated an ex-girlfriend, and she ended up being an absolute bitch. And I couldn't see this right off the bat because, again, I was thinking with a part of the anatomy that is not my brain, to be able to rationalize these things. But the cat knew. Snakes are kind of the same way. They're very calm and docile. As long as you don't fuck with them, they're not going to fuck with you. And as long as you don't step on them, well, rattlers are kind of way out there. They're like
You can get into those weird thought experiments in terms of how consciousness affects the fabric of reality. So it's like one of the classic examples is you're standing in a mall and you're looking at the back of somebody's head and you're thinking about them, and they, with no notion, like they're too far away for them to hear you, they turn around and look right at you. As like a...
Yeah.
That's more of a sixth sense thing, but I'm trying to like
relate. Being watched. Rupert Sheldrake.
Well, that's the human analogy for this cat, Now,
like you'd mentioned Rupert Sheldrake on that. Like, what did he have to say on this matter?
I don't know. All I know is that he wrote a book, or at least something with that title, the sense or feeling of being watched. And what Sheldrake is doing a bunch of interesting research grounding. He's a scientist. He's a legitimate scientist, but he's exploring these kind of gray areas which most scientists don't like to acknowledge. Like
The other one is the other one is when they're looking at flocks of birds and they look at the increment timings for the birds turning and flying in synchronicity with each other. If there's some sort of like a group mind effect to them, because literally they'll turn at timing increments that are shorter than what the consciousness of a bird should be able to handle. Weird things like that.
There's all these phenomena. Sheldrake is good because he really hones in on those that show. Well, there's more going on than quantitative science likes to ignore, in the kind of like materialistic kind of model that most scientists adhere to. He's like sort of pushing the envelope,
like a swarm or a hive mind kind of thing.
Yeah, there's stuff that goes beyond our, this idea that the consciousness is just
there's like a meta consciousness.
Yeah, so I mean, he's doing. I'm pretty sure he's in the New Magical Egypt. I know Venetian chants have been in contact with him. I could be wrong. So after a few whiskeys, some of the details get a bit slippery. But
trust me, we know.
But certainly he's certainly been in dialogue with Graham Hancock and like-minded people. A good friend of mine, Gabriel Roberts, who is a kind of a Gnostic author, has hosted both Rupert Sheldrake and Graham Hancock over at Joshua Tree in the United States, and so these kind of these lines of thought do come together. That's definitely a seeing.
And how do you think, like the like you've studied Egyptian religion for quite some time? Egyptian religion is considered more of a philosophy on life and death, and one's overall existence between the two planes. It's not like death is the end of the journey; it's the start of another continuation of the overall journey. It's just like a way station.
How do we connect the dots between the Neteru and the divine principles that rule the universe, and maybe alchemy? You must have.
Egyptian religious thought really was that the tomb is the womb. It was the place of rebirth, and that feeds into Greek philosophy. Certainly, Socrates and Plato, who defined, they literally defined philosophy as a path of preparation for death. It's the whole death of Socrates is really about learning to die before you die. If you know your soul is immortal, which comes back to this idea of gnosis. If you know your soul is immortal, then you have no need to fear death. You can go to your death like Socrates did. He could take the hemlock quite consciously. And have no fear, knowing that this world and this body was just a temporary kind of epiphenomenon, but that the reality of the soul and the world of the soul was eternal and immortal. So, and this really goes back to the Egyptian perception or the whole Egyptian attitude that the life here on Earth was geared towards death. I mean, Egyptian civilization was, all our monuments, everything that comes down to us was geared towards the cult of death and immortality. That's
a very important thing if you're you need everybody to drink that Kool-Aid if you're going to build a pyramid that takes hundreds of years.
Yeah. So, but clearly that, Schwaller de Lubicz said this. He said, the average person lived in mud huts, but they built temples and pyramids to eternity. Stone, that everything that comes down to us today from Egypt is made of stone, and that's dedicated to eternity. The common day-to-day life was made of mud brick, and that comes and goes just like our bodies do. So there was a definite emphasis in Egyptian civilization on gearing towards death as a path of or a gate to eternity. And I think that's that's really that distinctly feeds into the ground that Greek philosophy, or at least some of the major Greek philosophers, grew out of, because they were saying the same things, but in more intellectual and instead of saying it in mythological form, they articulated it in an intellectual form.
And even like that type of view of like preparing you how to die, like that's a very Masonic style of looking at life, as it were. Like, I again, not going too far into it, we're taught that similarity within our third degree of like life is a cycle. Like, the first degree is your birth, the second degree is your life, and the third degree is your death. And you're supposed to be able to realize that it's not about it's not about the fact that you're going to be born or that you're going to die, but it's what you do while you're actually here that matters. And it's the ability to be able to kind of leave things on a good note. Like, you've got a choice to either leave a good legacy or a shitty legacy. And you actually have the ability to, again, alchemically change your own surroundings based on your own actions and based on your own thought patterns. And your own, you change your moral code to alter the perceptions of the world around you so that you can be a better person. And then from that, you being a better person, you then change your reality. You manifest something that is more wholesome, more real, more enjoyable for yourself, your family, your friends, and the idea of the afterlife and how your soul is weathered against your actions are weathered against a feather, or your heart is rather. And if the heart is heavier than the feather, then you're devoured. If the feather is heavier, then you're fine. Those same principles are principles
That's why you need to eat all that monatomic gold so that it defies gravity.
Oh, the monatomic gold is bullshit. You know that.
We're gonna put it to the test. We're gonna get a small lab.
Now
that's an interesting point right there. That for the Egyptians, the soul, or the seat of consciousness, wasn't the head, it wasn't the brain like we currently think. It was the heart, and that's true of the ancient world in general. By Greek times, there's actually
we forget we have this amazing electromagnetic ticker inside of us.
Yeah, there's actually like debates in the Greek world where they were at the point where they were arguing whether the brain or the head or the heart was they called it the hegemonikon, the ruling center. So in the more mythological cultures, it was always the heart, and by the Greek philosophical times, it was the head. But there was a period where they were kind of debating it. But what that suggests is that, and this is where my work with Jean Gebser, the German cultural philosopher, he shows how there was a shift in consciousness, moving from the heart to the head, from mythological understandings of reality to rational, intellectual understandings of reality. And that coincides with this broad shift from a heart-centered view of reality to a head or intellectual-centered view of reality. And he took it back even deeper. He said there's a more visceral, gut-centered view of reality that goes back even deeper. But what's interesting, so the evolution of consciousness, or the seat of consciousness, is kind of like a collective Kundalini experience, where it raises from the lower viscera or centers to the heart, to the head, and ultimately out the crown. That seems to be the trajectory that this is pointing towards. But all the idea is that we have this axis of being. Our center is not one point; it's an axis. And we can, if you do meditation or all sorts of there's all kind of practices which allow you to engage with your being at different centers or points on the axis, and each of those points will give you a different perspective on reality. But the point is that, like, it's really the whole. It's the entire axis, which is really the modality of our full being.
There's sort of a funny train of thought that comes through, like the Alan Watts Zen Buddhism, where they talk a little bit about the brain doesn't work without the heart doesn't work without the brain. Really, you can't separate them. But this funny notion that everything serves the stomach.
Yeah, look, the Egyptians, considered magic, which they called the Egyptian word for magic was heka, and they considered magic to originate in the stomach, or not, or the lower viscera. What's interesting, and this is a point of contention I have with a lot of people. There's a lot. You've probably seen the memes and the web pages and the books where people are correlating different aspects of the brain's anatomy with ancient Egyptian symbols like the Eye of Horus and all this other kind of stuff.
Yep.
And
the Eye of Ra and the pituitary and pineal gland.
And people are like saying, Egyptians had all this ancient knowledge of the brain's anatomy, and the symbol correlates to the, this and that.
Presumably they cracked a few skulls.
Well, they actually did. There was trepanation. They did perform medical operations on the skull and brain. But what's interesting to me is that, because for the Egyptians, the center of consciousness or the soul was the heart. It was not the head or the brain. And we know that when we know this from the mortuary practices, the process of mummification. Almost everyone knows that they took the brain out and threw it away. The brain was not regarded as essential.
Well, the brain's just a processor. The heart's the actual hard drive.
Yeah, they preserved all the major organs of the body, including the heart, but they extracted and threw out the brain. So what does that tell you about the Egyptians' view of human anatomy and the role of the brain in consciousness?
That the brain was the processor, the heart was the actual hard drive. It's the same thing when people get heart transplants.
I think you have that backwards, but
the heart's the hard drive. The processor.
In importance, not in function, I guess.
I put this issue to John Anthony West. As part of our interviews for Magical Egypt, I put this to John Anthony West. He actually gave me a good response. He said, because some of the material we're working with in the new Magical Egypt goes deeply into the brain anatomy and the symbolism and the form, the actual form of it and the relationship of those forms to other things. And there's this deep kind of wisdom encoded in the forms of the brain structure itself, which seems very compelling. But I was always like, well, the Egyptians threw that fucker out and they didn't give a shit about it. How does that, tally up? But so I put this to John Anthony West, and he made a good point. He said that in the embodied world, it's the world of duality. So we need the brain, which is a dualized organ. It's two hemispheres split down the middle. So he said, that's necessary for embodied dualistic existence. But once we die and transcend that, then we don't need that anymore. And to me, that it's like, okay, that's a good insight. That works for me. Not to say that I'm still divided. Pun unintended, whether the dualized brain.
How many mummified hearts do we have?
well, I think the Egyptians put the organs in the 5. Is it 5 canopic jars when they're mummified? They preserved the organs. They extracted the brain from. But and they had the heart amulet, which was
like worldwide, all the museums. How many mummified hearts? Any
5.
Wild speculations?
I have no idea.
A dozen, 100.
So, the idea that again, I'm going to go back with and Ellen mentions canopic jars. Yes, that was the term for them, if I'm not mistaken. Like the idea of the brain, like the brain's good for us. Yes, when you're here on the physical plane, if we are trying to run a physical body, you need a processor to be able to actually complete the functions and send signals to the extremities. That is what the brain is for. In terms of the overall knowledge, in terms of the intuitiveness, the connection, the idea of the soul being connected to that heart muscle, and the heart has tons of neurotransmitters in it. It has tons of nerves in it. You're talking about one of the most intricate and complex organs in the entire body that is supposed to pump blood at a specific rate in a specific order for every single minute of every single day of your life. So it is one of the most highly evolved organs we have, and there are even stories of people who have had heart transplants and they've got memories from the other person. They've all of a sudden don't like certain foods anymore. Like, how can a brain account for this? All the brain is there is just to be able to process the information. But the core of who we are...
Well, remember we were looking at Susskind with nested infinities and...
Well, true,
This is the thing, like, we have the brain as a central nervous system, and it runs down our spine. It's very important. No one's denying that it plays such a huge role. The heart and the solar plexus, and there's a massive nervous system in the solar plexus, but also that they've discovered relatively, in modern times at least, the enteric nervous system in the gut. So we have three centers of consciousness or being in our lower viscera, in our heart, and in our head. It's just almost like body, soul, and mind. It's almost like it correlates with the alchemical trinity of sulfur, mercury, and salt, and also the Gurdjieffian idea of the fact that we are three-brained beings with a center in our... It's really a simplification of the chakra system. We have this axis of being with up to 7 centers of energy, but really we can simplify or extract the essence of this down to 3 major centers in the lower viscera, the heart, and the head. And the Chinese alchemists or energetic, in Taoist body work, they talk about 3 dantians, three centers, and they correlate with these 3 parts of our being. And these are 3 parts of our being that we can't really ignore. We can't ignore our gut instinct. We can't ignore our heart and soul. We can't ignore our rationality or our head or our intellect. To be a whole being, we have to integrate these 3 layers of existence. And speaking of heeding the call of our deeper natures, I do have to go to the bathroom. This whiskey is going right through me, so I have to go to the bathroom again. I shall return very soon.
Sure, we'll do a quick break.
All right. So
grand unified theory of all the cross-cultural mental models.
See, that's where my,
I feel like modern man is plagued with all these different models from all over the globe. And then it's, we can recite them all, but I feel like we're confounded with trying to reconcile or integrate them into like a grand unified theory. So we have to shed some of them, keep some other elements. It's a tricky puzzle. That's how does modern man do that? Except with each other, maybe. It's too big a question for one mind.
This is the alchemy. You have to extract the essence, out of presented with multiplicity, a bewildering multiplicity. You have to extract the unified essence. What is the core of that, of all of that. Because otherwise we're pulled away into confusion, and that's no fun.
You can be. I feel like most modern men would be nauseated with cross-cultural comparatives. It certainly takes something. It takes something out of you to like pop in and out of those different mental operating systems all the time. It's a lot of rebooting when you're switching cultures.
And I think
not everyone can handle that.
Intellectually, it's a conundrum, but that's where we have to start feeling it out with our soul or our heart or our that part of our being, because that has an important when you're presented with like a whole range of options which are rationally or logically fairly secure, then you got to revert to your more intuitive. The intuitive level of decision, and that's more important than we give it credit for. So that level goes well. That's able to distinguish on a more subtle or more qualitative level than our rational intellects are. And then even deeper, there's this kind of gut primordial instinct, which is it's not, it's pre-conscious, or it's not even like it's at another level entirely, So, but we have to start evaluating reality with all those levels of our being, not just the mind, not just the soul, not just the gut instinct, but how do we synthesize those into one perception of reality?
A few times in the podcast, I've made mention of. There's something Timothy Leary and Robert Anton came up with, which was the 8 circuits of consciousness, and it's sort of along the lines of you're shifting gears in a car, so it's very difficult to walk through everyday life with transcendental consciousness switched on. It's you're eating, you're driving, and you're trying to have like a Buddhist transcendental consciousness state of mind, but it's the gear shifting for the average man, dropping down to work the 9 to 5, but then trying to hit transcendental consciousness, 6th or 8th gear, and there's this anguish and going back and forth between those different states of consciousness where we're just grinding our gears because most people don't know how to work the clutch.
Right.
And I feel like that's the real trick of it, because you don't want to be a monk stuck on a mountain constantly in 6th gear for transcendental meditation, where you'll never get a whole lot accomplished in the physical world. You'll go hungry if you're only meditating all the time. And you don't want to be the guy who's constantly stuck in 2nd gear, and you never get to see those other states of consciousness. So it's one is not always better than the other. It's finding the ability to work that clutch that really makes life.
Yeah. And then that's when I talk about non-dualism, that's kind of what I'm in another way of saying it. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is that we operate on more than one level of being, and we can't reduce it to either or mentality of like emotion versus intellect, or spirit versus matter, or whatever kind of dualism or reductive formula that you might want to throw at it. It's like we are whole beings, and we need to exist and expand into our totality, and that's really the task of gnosis, to be. And going back to this idea that cosmology and cosmogony, like the Egyptian creative process, the divine mind generated the organs of articulation, which evoked magically the body, which its literal body, which the divine mind was embodied in. We are all levels of reality, from the divine mind itself down to the physical cosmos and everything in between.
Well,
and that's really our birthright and what we have to aspire to. And everything that limits us, we're conditioned to have all these limitations that pull us back from being in our full totality. And that to me is a process of initiation, or of it's the path of gnosis, returning back to the fullness of our divine being.
Is there anything in particular that you've found interesting that your mind is gnawing on lately? Like, do you think Falconelli actually did it? Did he obtain immortality?
Well,
notions like that from alchemy.
In the sense of the legendary Falconelli, where he was this being walking around physically in the world, well after.
Did he find the grand theory that's connecting it all?
I don't personally believe in these theories that he was, living well beyond his mortal death and as some sort of physical immortal being. So, and for me, physical bodily immortality is never the answer. It's a means to an end. Yes, you can use alchemical or any other means to extend your physical life on Earth, but it's never for its own sake. That's a quantitative.
You're here to have an emotional experience, not just to live forever.
Well, no, our physical bodies our physical existence is a womb or a matrix for the gestation of our immortal bodies, which are ever present. But we have to, like Michelangelo's statue, we have to pull away the extraneous parts to reveal the primordial immortal nature, the primordial perfection, which exists underneath all the stone and rubble. And creating an immortal, creating a body that lives longer in a physical sense on Earth is fine, but it is not the end point. It's just you're prolonging the matrix or the womb in which gives you that window to develop the immortal body. The Chinese alchemical texts talk about that they liken it to a golden cicada. They say the golden cicada sheds its shell, and then you have a body outside your body. And so what they mean is that there's this immortal being inside your mortal body, which once you shed the mortal shell, you already are. The immortal being always was and always it will be, but it just takes that effort to break or crack the shell, which separates the mortal from the immortal.
It's like that lobster meme. The lobsters shedding their shells, and they're forced to be uncomfortable. They're very vulnerable, and they become recluse when they're out of their shell.
Totally.
They build a new one. So that's when human beings put themselves in isolation to sort of re-identify themselves. It's a natural pattern that we follow. I've also heard it that maturing is really sort of when you talk about the soul having an emotional experience, but maturity is really the human being learning to sequence its emotions. So you're depressed, you get nowhere, but if you're depressed and you get angry, then you get somewhere. So as you mature, you're conscientiously evoking emotional sequencing, and that's really what maturity is.
It's very much the symbolism of Cancer in astrology. Cancer is the crab or the lobster, and it's the emotional being, which, as you said, it's got an exoskeleton. It creates this external hard shell, but inside it's soft and vulnerable. But in order to grow, it has to shed the shell, become vulnerable, and then it can grow, but it's at its most exposed at that point. So it has, I went through an experience of this. I was working with Vajrayana Buddhist techniques. I was doing an extended Tara practice, accumulation of Tara mantras, and Tara is very much a feminine goddess it's very emotional, heart-centered and emotional-centered, and I had a lot of insights. At the core of that process for me was realizing just that we are like, we create these hard shells around us, but really we're these soft, quivering, emotional beings who can only grow when we shed our armor. We cast off our armor and become vulnerable. And that was a huge lesson, because I'm a scholar. I'm very much an intellectual being, and a lot of my armor is intellectual. But when you shed all that, and you can just become this quivering emotional mass, then you can grow. And then yes, you reform your armor and all that, but it's important. You have to become vulnerable in order to grow, and that's the lesson of the zodiacal sign of Cancer, or
we certainly have a form of that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely a thing. It was certainly a major lesson for me a couple of years ago.
Now, just as we're starting to get towards that, as we're getting towards the end of the glass, we're getting towards the end of the show. So, I'd like to, and I notice that since I let my dog out, who you can kind of see her off in the shadows, probably for all you at home, you've taken your jacket off. So I know that it's probably getting a little bit warm out there, and it's part of living in a perpetually nice climate, I guess.
Oh, it gets cold. It doesn't get Canadian cold, but it gets cold enough. But yeah.
Canadian cold's anything under 0 degrees pretty well. But even then, up until about -5, we wear shorts.
Nothing like that. But yeah.
Now, for those who want to be able to start off in Hermeticism and alchemy, where would you point people towards to get them started?
Oh God, that's a good question.
Robert Bartlett for the alchemy.
Well, for practical alchemy,
if you want
for
to
laboratory,
practical alchemy.
Yeah, for if you want to actually do laboratory, physical material alchemical processes, Robert Bartlett's books are definitely good. I mean, I've studied with Robert Bartlett. I've met Robert a number of times, and I've done his courses. I definitely recommend his work. I would, if you want books that are entry points into alchemy and Hermetic philosophy, there's a couple I can mention. There was a book by Titus Burckhardt called Alchemy. I think it's called Science of the Cosmos, Science of the Soul, I think might be its subtitle. That's a good general introduction to the philosophy and cosmology of alchemy, Hermeticism in general. More in terms of operating principles on a kind of universal sense, in a perennial sense.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Julius Evola's book, The Hermetic Tradition, which is Julius Evola is a somewhat controversial traditionalist who wrote a bunch of books. But his book called The Hermetic Tradition is great. It's a fantastic book. It's really deep, but it's focusing on a spiritual and ultimately the spiritual alchemy. I've got a book myself called Alchemical Traditions, which is like a 700-page sprawling opus. It's an anthology, so it's like I edited the book. I brought on a bunch of scholars to write separate chapters on different alchemical traditions, and so I wrote an introductory chapter, and I wrote on Egyptian alchemy. I wrote on Chinese alchemy, and I wrote a specific chapter on Schwaller de Lubicz. This is Schwaller's alchemy. Then I got specialists like David Gordon White, established scholars like David Gordon White, Kim Lai, to write on the Tantric alchemy and Tibetan alchemy and other forms of alchemy. So it's kind of like it's a big sprawling anthology of the world's alchemical traditions from the ancient to the modern world. So it's a dense beast, it's a big, sprawling, dense kind of hit. One day I'm going to write a very short, accessible book on alchemy, but that's not out there yet. But on a personal level, the book I've just released
sounds like a compendium of alchemy.
Yeah, it's more a compendium that you'll have and you'll refer back to. The book I've just released is called The Leaf of Immortality, and that book is it's more. I mean, the core of this book goes back 10 years to when I had some major crucial experiences on entheogens or psychedelics, which a lot of basically the premise is I'm a scholar. I studied esotericism and philosophy and religious studies and comparative religion for like 10 years or more, and then I took heroic doses of mushrooms, and then later ayahuasca.
Heroic.
And all this learning became alive.
Mm-hmm.
And the experience I had of that is channeled into this book. This book is kind of the experience of what happens when you study this stuff for like a decade or more, and take heroic doses of mushrooms or ayahuasca. Then the dried riverbeds of academia just get flooded and become alive. They're living. So it's a short book. It's not a sprawling exegesis like my alchemy book, but it's much more personal and much more coming from the heart and my personal experience rather than me as an academic. Mm-hmm. And they're both two parts of my being. So my academic side does feed into this book to some degree, but it's not the core or center of gravity. But yeah, so that's, there are two books I've put out, which if you want to explore alchemy in its academic sense or alchemy in its experiential sense, because very much the core message of this book is about how to transform poison into medicine. And alchemy was always traditionally about taking metals like mercury, which are poisonous, and turning them into medicines, which can make you immortal. So I don't explore that in a literal way, but I do explore that in a sense of like, how do you take the things in reality in the world as you experience it? Mm-hmm. How do you take the things that are poisons or things that want to kill you, or things that are inimical to you? How do you take these negative things and turn them into medicines and vehicles of liberation?
Haven't they made literal transmutation of elements where they would take liquid mercury and they put it in a nuclear reactor and I believe, they hit it with neutrinos or something until it ends up with an extra...
They have done
it turns into gold, literally.
Yeah,
it's a radioactive gold. But that's
bombarded like chemical elements and gotten like actual elemental gold. I mean this is possible.
And they've found giant pools of liquid mercury under some of the Mexican pyramids.
Right, but I think they have proven that this elemental transmutation is possible. And the irony is that it takes so much money and technology and energy to make this happen that it's the financial reward is negligible. It's not about gaining gold in its financial sense.
Legacy is the ultimate currency. That's my quote of the day. So in a world where money is not fiat currency.
Seawater has gold in it. Mm-hmm. Seawater has gold in it, and we've known that for a long time. But extracting that gold, the minute amount of gold in seawater costs so much that the gold you gain does not amount, doesn't cover your costs.
Yeah, they're trying to extract uraniums and plutoniums through some sort of crazy filtration process on ocean water too now.
Yeah. So these transmutations or extractions are possible, but it kind of pushes you to the limit where you go, well, hold on a minute. Is this really what I'm aiming for? Am I do I
What's
really want to give my heart and soul to get for material gain, to realize that, wait a minute, the material gain is actually not that much, and it's kind of a metaphor for life. So I thought, well, much of a sacrifice of your physical existence and your soul existence for material reward.
And that's it. Like that's kind of the whole point of it.
Yeah.
Wow. Before you go, I just wanted to because I know that when we started the show, we had some sound issues, and my great intro that I've been practicing all day got lost. So I want to give a special shout out. I know they're still in the chat. Michael Hess, as well as Ellen McCurdy. They recently contributed to the show. If you like what we do every single week, we want to be able to do more of these, and things like servers and internet connections and new equipments and new webcams. As we've got up here, we just upgraded our webcam to get more of a beautiful view, because big sexy Alex can only fit into so much camera.
We've got picture-in-picture now. That's
exactly.
Cool.
So if you want to be able to see more, go to denoflore.com, click on support the show, send us $1, or if you want to give more. But you know what? We pay this out of our pocket. We're trying to stay ad and sponsor free because, well, most sponsors I know of will not allow us to be able to drink, swear, and smoke on camera. And we want to be able to continue to say whatever the hell we want and bring on awesome guests like Aaron here to talk about some crazy, crazy awesome shit and teach us about things that we could never even possibly think about. And it takes a lot of time and effort to be able to do these shows. So we've got listeners who are out there who support us and who love us and want to keep supporting us, and we want to be able to recognize those people. Doug, who was actually a guest last night, signed up to our Patreon, to patreon.com/denoflore, and signed up for the $5 a month package because he loves us so much and wants to see what we do continue on. And, from the contributions we have received over the last 2 weeks, our internet is paid for, thankfully. So we are good to go for the next month. And thank you all for making the show a possibility and for making it worth doing, because when I interact in the chat, when I interact on Facebook, when I interact with you all on Twitter, it makes me so warm and gooey inside to know that we have reached all these people.
Keep logging into chat. Let us know what kind of topics you guys want to see coming up on the podcast in the near future.
Yeah, I like what you guys are doing, because I'm an academic, and my large part of my world is very much textual and linguistic, and the thing is, a lot of people, not everyone reads books, and a lot of people like the audio medium as a way of transmission, and
great when you're driving,
podcasts, from even like audio books and stuff, like, I don't know. It's a more sensory. It's you can hear it. And to some degree, depending on if the video is coming through, you can see it. I think that's a huge. It opens the domain to such a degree, like to people that might not ordinarily pick up, scholarship on Egyptian cosmology or stuff that I might write or publish. It opens the channels of that gnosis and knowledge to a broader audience, and I think that's to be commended.
And we've done full on lectures. Guests have brought on PDF presentations, and we've had 3-4 hour lectures just based on what they've been presenting. And whether it's science, whether it's metaphysics, whether it's ancient history, whether it's UFOs and ancient aliens, or discussing the lack thereof from a reptilian standpoint, we love doing this, and we do it every once a week at least, but sometimes we do it twice a week. I'd like to be able to do it 5 days a week. If people Jimmy Church can do it and pay the bills. For me, it's not about getting famous. It's not about it's about doing what's right, getting the knowledge out there, and if I can make a living off of it to be able to support my family in the barest of senses,
Sure.
That's
the audio is really nice too, because the eyes do get tired. You can only watch so many TV
This is true.
shows, so many movies, so many
Support our
YouTube
witty
clips.
habits, you know?
Yeah.
No.
It's nice to lie back with your eyes closed and listen to
No. I think it's
train of thought from
important
other people.
to do what is meaningful and promote something that is meaningful into the broader culture as a whole. And no, I'm totally with you. Like, I'll give you guys a plug, and it's definitely something to be put out into the world.
And we appreciate that. And again, Aaron, we know that you're not going to be able. You're not going to still be up when our hangover episode tomorrow morning or later on this evening or night for you happens, because we always do our like the hangover. It's we talk about subjects on the show, on the next show.
Right.
And then also usually because we drink scotch, the whole idea is it's a hangover, the hangover. So that's my play on words. Ha. But before you go, I just want to be able to read a comment from El Nino for all the ladies and gentlemen out there. And then I'm going to play you the outro music. And we still have two choices because I was building part of the website today, and I didn't have a chance to load more music on there. But El Nino writes,
"Send Chris your outro music."
If you're a musician, we will play your outro music. So no aliens, no mysticism, no religion, no magic, just good old common sense. Study the cross-sectional diagram of the pyramid, and you will quickly see that the internal passages are geared towards a functioning motor. Accounting for the effects of such a process will lead you to assumptions about what the pyramid couldn't have been used for. Maybe power generation or a communications device. Both Doug and Danny these are our guests from last night, presented ideas based on practicality. To build the plateau up and then build pyramids on top of is a feat of engineering even by today's standards. And this is true. This is actually confirmed by Baval. And I talked to him about this, and he's like, no, that buildup was insanely hard to do. And this lends to the idea that pyramids served a real purpose. Maybe they were tombs after they served their the working life. Maybe I hope that whoever watches this becomes inspired and realizes that many pyramid theories, including the tomb theory, fall short of explaining what could actually be going on inside the Great Pyramid. So thank you, Den of Lore, for hosting the show, and thanks to whomever has contributed to these ideas. John Cadman, Chris Dunn, Gummel Effley, I probably mangled that name, Stephen Meller, Doug Keenan, Danny Kerr, and Nikola Tesla. El Nino. And, we get these on comments. We get them by email. If you like the show, send us comment on the show. Send us an email at info@denoflore.com. I will read your shit out on the air because I love these encouraging emails because it's so positive. It is so... it's good to know that we're doing some good work here. So
it's good, yeah. It's good to know that feedback is really invaluable. It keeps you going. It really keeps you going.
There are some golden minds on the internet, not just trolls.
Well, the trolls, I read those to you in private, and I ridicule them quite often.
It's good to know that you touch with real souls, that you're making a meaningful connection or difference to. My work, I now and then I hear that I'm actually connecting with people that my work is making a difference to, and that's invaluable. That's invaluable.
And we have two outro songs, which one of them is actually the song that I just play on loop for the hangover, but still it's a great outro song. I've got Scattered Knowledge and Spellbound. Which one would you like to hear?
What was the first one?
Scattered Knowledge or Spellbound?
I like maybe Spellbound.
Ooh, we haven't played that one for a while. All right.
We've got enough scattered knowledge,
Trying to get past that.
It's magically bonded.
There we go. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much again for tuning into the show. For all the people who join us in YouTube chat, we are so thankful to have you joining us on there with your questions and your thoughts. Next week, we actually have a very special couple of guests. Returning to the program, if you've ever done any research into vortex math, the great Brandon Powell and his brother Randy Powell are going to be on the show for a special Wednesday afternoon, 7 p.m. show. That is for next week. I've got Scottish Rite all
Google
next week.
Abha Taurus.
Yes.
In preparation.
I've got Scottish Rite. We're conferring our 32nd degree, so we're going to make some more high-level Masons in the next week. So my Thursday, Friday, and Saturday are shot, but Wednesday we are doing the show. And, again, join us all on the show tomorrow morning after breakfast if you're in the Western Hemisphere. For The Hangover, it's going to be going on at 11 Eastern, 10 p.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central, 9 a.m. Mountain, and 8 a.m. Pacific. We're going to have Scotty Roberts and Rocky Stucci on to talk some politics and, kind of get over the night as it was. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been your host, Chris George Zuger, and Big Sexy Alex, #BSA, for episode 30 of The Den of Lore, March 31st, 2017. I will see you all tomorrow. Aaron, it's been an honor and a pleasure, and thank you very much for being a wonderful, wonderful guest. Everyone's enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it, and it's expanded my mind so much.
Thank you. No, I'd love to come back sometime.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We would love to have you.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
Alrighty.
A real pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to play the rest of the song out and try and figure out how to... I never figured out how to do the outro to this. Well, what am I going to phase it into? I guess I'm just going to play it. I'm just going to stop the show. So...
yeah, just roll it.
Just roll with it. And Spencer Cross, the monoatomic gold, that was just me busting Alex's balls. Still love you to death. You're awesome. Keep being awesome. Cheers, everybody.